Hello everyone. I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. The divorce had left behind a particular kind of silence, the kind that isn't an absence of noise but a presence of its own. It settled in the corners of my house in suburban Toronto, clinging to the empty space on the king-sized bed and echoing in the clink of a single fork against a plate. I was Alex, 33, a freelance graphic designer navigating the quiet wreckage of a 10-year marriage. My world had shrunk to the dimensions of my MacBook screen, the hum of the refrigerator, and the view from my home office window. My office looked out onto Maple Creek Lane, a street so archetypally suburban it could have been a film set. Manicured lawns, identical two-story houses, and a rotating cast of neighbors performing the mundane ballet of daily life. The Hendersons across the street washing their SUV on Saturdays, Mrs. Gable next door to them tending her prize-winning hydrangeas, Jaspreet 2 doors down chasing her toddler, Leo, across their lawn. It was a backdrop of comforting normalcy, a visual anchor in the choppy waters of my new solitude. The first time I noticed the change, I blamed my eyes. I'd been working for 14 hours straight, wrestling with a hideous corporate logo for a client who thought synergistic dynamism could be expressed with clashing shades of teal and magenta. I leaned back, rubbing my temples, and glanced out the window. The sun was setting, painting the autumn sky in bruised purples and oranges. But the light hitting the Hendersons' large bay window wasn't reflecting the sunset. It was a different quality of light altogether, a cool, flat, silver-gray flicker. It pulsed with the sluggish, inconsistent rhythm of a dying fluorescent tube or an old cathode ray television searching for a signal. I blinked, hard. When I looked again, the window was reflecting the sky properly, a perfect mirror of the twilight. Screen fatigue, I diagnosed, turning back to my work. You're seeing pixels everywhere. A few days later, it happened again. This time it was the Gables' upstairs bedroom window. I was on a coffee break, just staring out, letting my mind go slack. The flicker was there, a faint but definite strobing of gray light. It wasn't a reflection of anything inside their house, their lights were off. It was as if the glass itself was the source. I watched, fascinated, for a full minute before it faded, leaving behind the familiar reflection of oak trees and power lines. Coincidence? A trick of the light, the angle of the sun through the thinning autumn leaves. My brain was manufacturing patterns, starved for stimulus beyond my glowing rectangle of a desk. The standing began in late October. The temperature had dropped, a crisp Canadian chill heralding the coming winter. People were sealing their windows, turning on their furnaces. But not the Hendersons. Their bay window was cracked open a few inches, a sliver of darkness against the tidy beige siding. And in the opening, perfectly framed, stood Mr. Henderson. He was motionless, a silhouette against the dim interior of his living room. He wasn't reading, or looking at his phone, or even, it seemed, looking out. He was just, standing. Facing the glass. I watched him for 20 minutes while pretending to answer emails. He didn't move a muscle. It was unnerving. Maybe he was meditating. A new health kick. Then his wife, Brenda, joined him. She stood beside him, equally still, both of them like department store mannequins positioned in a domestic diorama. Finally, Brenda turned and said something, and the spell was broken. Mr. Henderson shook his head slightly, as if coming out of a trance, and they moved away from the window, pulling it shut. It was strange, but ignorable. People are strange. Grief, I reasoned, was making me a voyeur, projecting my own sense of dislocation onto my neighbors. Sarah, my ex-wife, had always said I overthought things, that I saw narratives where there was only noise. Maybe she was right. But then Mrs. Gable started doing it. A sweet, bustling woman in her late 60s, She now had a habit of standing before her open living room window for long stretches, even when a bitter wind was whipping leaves across her lawn. She'd just stand there, hands clasped behind her back, staring at the glass. One afternoon I saw Jaspreet's husband, Raj, doing the same at their kitchen window, a mug of what I assumed was tea growing cold in his hand. It wasn't everyone, and it wasn't all the time. It was sporadic enough to remain in the realm of the peculiar. But the flicker was becoming more common. A pulse of gray light from a window down the street, a shimmer from another. It was never bright, always subtle, like a secret the houses were keeping. And always, it coincided with the cold. The colder it got, the more windows were left open, and the more people I saw standing in silent communion with the panes of glass. My rationalizations were wearing thin. I started a log, a simple text file on my desktop, timestamping the flickers and the standing. October 28, 9:14 p.m., Henderson House, bay window. Flicker for approximate 3 minutes. Mr. H standing. October 30th, 7:30 a.m., Gable House, living room. Flicker. Window open, 2 degrees Celsius outside. November 2nd, 4:55 p.m., 5 houses showing flicker simultaneously. All on the north side of the street. Reading it back, I felt a tremor of paranoia. I sounded like a conspiracy theorist mapping out ley lines. I needed a reality check. I emailed Sarah. I kept it light, burying the concern in a general update about my work. Weirdest thing, I wrote. Half the neighborhood has started this strange habit of standing motionless in front of their open windows. In this weather. Probably some new mindfulness trend I'm too cynical to understand. Hope you're well. Her reply came the next day. Alex, are you getting out enough? Maybe you should join a gym or something. It's not healthy to be cooped up watching your neighbors all day. Call me if you need to talk. S. The casual dismissal stung more than an argument would have. It wasn't just that she didn't believe me, it was that my observation fit so neatly into her narrative of my post-divorce decline. I was the lonely man in the empty house, seeing ghosts. Her words pushed me further into my own head, my own observations. If I was the only one seeing it, I had to be sure of what I was seeing. That night, the flicker in the Hendersons' window was stronger than I'd ever seen it. It pulsed with a steady, almost biological rhythm, a slow, gray heartbeat. Brenda was standing there, her form a stark cutout against the glow. My heart hammered in my chest. This wasn't a trick of the light. This was real. I grabbed my Canon DSLR, the one I used for professional texture and stock photography. I attached my best telephoto lens, braced it on the windowsill, and manually adjusted the focus until the mullions of the Hendersons' window were razor sharp. I took a deep breath and pressed the shutter. Click. I took another. Click. And another. I bracketed the exposures, fiddled with the ISO, treating it like a technical problem to be solved. If there was light, the camera would see it. Later, I uploaded the photos to my computer. The high-resolution images filled my 27-inch monitor. The first few shots showed exactly what I'd seen with my naked eye, the dark shape of Brenda Henderson, the window frame, the weird, washed-out gray light that seemed to have no source. It was creepy, but it was what I expected. Then I opened the last image. It was a longer exposure, taken when the flicker was at its peak. I zoomed in, pushing the pixels to their limit, my designer's eye scanning for detail in the digital grain. Brenda's silhouette was there, solid and black. But inside the field of gray light, superimposed over her, was something else. It was faint, like a photographic double exposure left to fade in the sun for a century. But it was undeniably there. Another silhouette. It was not Brenda. It was taller, impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed too long, its head tilted at an angle that would have snapped a human neck. It was an echo in the glass, a shape made of static and faint light. And it was utterly, terrifyingly alien. And as I stared, I realized with a surge of ice-cold dread that it was looking right back at me. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. The photograph changed everything. It yanked the phenomenon out of the realm of subjective perception and slammed it onto the solid ground of evidence. It was no longer something I was seeing, it was something I had captured. The silhouette, the echo, was my terrible secret, living inside a 30-megabyte raw file on my hard drive. For 2 days, I did nothing but stare at it. I applied filters, adjusted contrast, cranked up the sharpness. Every manipulation only confirmed its presence. It wasn't a reflection or a lens flare. It was a figure, imprinted in the light. I began taking photos every night, a grim ritual. I documented the Gables window, the house 4 doors down, Jaspreet and Raja's kitchen. And I found more of them. Each window that flickered had an echo. They were all different, some stooped, some impossibly erect, one that seemed to have too many arms, but they shared that same unnatural tallness, that same gaunt, skeletal frame. They were a silent, spectral population living in the windows of my neighbors, visible only through the alchemy of lens and sensor. My isolation deepened. The knowledge was a physical weight. I'd walk to the grocery store and the world would feel thin, a veneer over something else. The cashier's pleasant, "Have a nice day," sounded hollow, the piped music felt like a distraction. Did they see it? Did they feel the wrongness? Or was I the only one tuned to this disturbing frequency? The house, once a sanctuary of solitude, now felt like a besieged outpost. I was surrounded. I had to talk to someone. Not Sarah. This was beyond her. I needed to try a neighbor, to ground truth my insanity. My chance came on a Tuesday, recycling day. I saw Jaspreet wrestling her blue bin to the curb, her little boy, Leo, bundled in a snowsuit, trailing behind her. "Morning, Jaspreet," I said, trying to sound casual, neighborly. "Oh, hi, Alex. Cold one, eh?" She smiled, a genuine, warm smile that made me feel monstrous for what I was about to do. "Yeah, it's getting there. Hey, listen, this is going to sound really weird, but have you noticed anything odd with your windows lately? Or any of the windows on the street?" Her smile didn't falter, but it changed. It became fixed, a polite mask. "Odd? How do you mean?" "Like, the way they reflect light sometimes. A kind of flickering. And maybe. I don't know, have you found yourself leaving them open?" I was babbling, I knew it. Jaspreet's eyes unfocused for a fraction of a second. She glanced at her own house, at the large picture window where I'd photographed the echo. Her expression was one of profound, placid confusion, as if I'd asked her to describe the color of Tuesday. "The windows? They're just windows, Alex. Glass. They keep the cold out." She said it with the simple, unassailable finality of someone stating that the sky is blue. There was no curiosity, no alarm. Just dismissal. She patted Leo's head. "We should get inside before we freeze. You take care, Alex." She walked away, and I was left standing by my recycling bin, the cold seeping into my bones. It wasn't just that she denied it was how she denied it. The concept I presented to her, flickering windows, didn't compute. It was like I had spoken a word in a language that had never existed. I wasn't just being ignored, I was being edited out of the conversation. I was the glitch in her reality. That's when the secondary mystery began to surface, born from my increasingly frantic late-night research. If I couldn't get answers from the people around me, I would get them from the past. I typed "Maple Creek Lane Strange Phenomena" into search engines, expecting nothing. I got forum posts from a decade ago, from a community news site that was now defunct but archived. The posts were from when our subdivision was being built. Anyone else's radio going haywire near the new Maple Creek development? Keep picking up this weird static. Almost sounds like whispering. My TV gets weird interference patterns whenever I drive by that construction site. Only there. Digging deeper, I found municipal planning documents from the 1990s. Our quiet suburban paradise was built on land that had once housed the North York Communications Relay Station. It was a Cold War-era facility, a cluster of powerful antennas and transmitters designed for long-range, low-frequency broadcasts. It had been decommissioned in 1995 and torn down. There was one grainy black-and-white photo of the main tower, a skeletal finger of steel pointing at the sky. It was located almost exactly where the Hendersons' house now stood. A red herring? Probably. But it was a thread, and I pulled on it. Low-frequency broadcasts. Whispering static. I thought about the gray, staticky light in the windows. What if the demolition hadn't been complete? What if something was left behind, buried under the foundations of these houses, still broadcasting a faint, residual signal? My isolation drove me to the fringes of the internet. I couldn't be the only one who had seen something like this. I found a forum called The Seam, a place for people to anonymously share experiences with what they called reality bleed, or world static. The posts were a mix of obvious fiction, mental illness, and a few that resonated with a terrifying ring of truth. Using a throwaway email and the handle, Observer33, I wrote a post. I was careful, clinical. I described the flicker, the standing, the open windows. I didn't mention the echoes at first. I just laid out the observable facts. For days, nothing. Then, a private message. The username was Cassandra_V. The light you're describing, the message began. It's not a reflection. You know that. It's reception. The glass is acting as an antenna. You need to be careful. Observing the signal is one thing. Photographing it is another. You're focusing the resonance. You're giving it form. My blood ran cold. She knew. I wrote back, my fingers trembling. Form? What do you mean? What is it? Her reply was almost instantaneous. I don't know what it is. A signal. An echo of a potential reality. A message from a place without light. But I know what happens to the receivers. They attune. The signal finds the quiet places in their minds, the moments when they are idle, and it fills them. It's not malicious. A broadcast doesn't hate the radio. It just plays its song. You mentioned your neighbors stand there. Are they doing anything else? Have you noticed any patterns? Patterns. The word clicked with my designer brain. I had been documenting the what, not the how. I went back to my observation log, to my photos. I started cross-referencing times. The flicker wasn't random. There was a rhythm. It often peaked between 9:10 and 9:20 p.m. And there were gestures. A slight tilt of the head. A slow raising of a hand to touch the glass. Small, repetitive movements, synchronized across different houses. They weren't just standing. They were listening. They were learning. The paranoia was now a constant companion, a humming engine in the back of my skull. I bought blackout blinds and installed them in every room, plunging my house into perpetual twilight. But I couldn't resist peeking through a crack in my office blinds each night. The street had become a silent theater of the bizarre. More windows were open now, dark mouths gaping in the cold. More figures stood inside, bathed in that spectral gray light. One evening, I was watching Mrs. Gable. She stood at her window, her silhouette crisp against the flicker. As I watched, she turned her head slowly, with a creaking, unnatural smoothness. She turned until she was facing my house directly. I knew she couldn't see me behind my blinds, but I felt her gaze like a physical pressure. Then, bathed in the light of her window, she smiled. It was a wide, vacant, terrible smile, and it was not hers. It was a smile for the thing that was watching from my window. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. I ran to my own living room window, the one facing the street. The blackout blind was securely down. I stood before it, my hand hovering over the cord to pull it up, to see if my own window was flickering. The thought was terrifying. Observing the signal is one thing, you're focusing the resonance. I backed away from the window. The house was no longer a fortress. It was a container. And I was trapped inside with the growing certainty that the contagion wasn't just outside anymore. It was seeping through the walls, through the glass, through the very air I was breathing. And it was waiting for a quiet moment to play its song for me. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The smile, that vacant, borrowed smile on Mrs. Gable's face, was a turning point. The anomaly was no longer passive. It was aware. It knew I was watching. My correspondence with Cassandra_V became my only lifeline. She was my confessor, my oracle, my fellow cartographer of a collapsing reality. I sent her one of the photos of the echoes. The tall, thin silhouette in the Hendersons' window. I was terrified of what she would say. Her response chilled me to the marrow. I've seen them before. Not like this. Not so clear. We call them the statics. They aren't ghosts, Alex. A ghost is an imprint of something that was. A memory. The statics are placeholders. They're what gets rendered by the signal before a proper connection is established. Think of it as the default avatar in a video game, the shape the world assigns before the user's data has fully loaded. The people in your neighborhood are the users. The signal is the download. The statics are the vessel it's being downloaded into. A download. The concept was so sterile, so technical, it was more horrifying than any ghost story. It wasn't a haunting, it was a system overwrite. The people weren't possessed, they were being replaced, their consciousness slowly and quietly overwritten by a new operating system broadcast from the ruins of that old Cold War tower. What does it want? I typed, the question feeling futile even as I asked it. Want is a human word, she replied. Does a radio station want to be heard? It just broadcasts. Its nature is to propagate. This signal is the same. It's propagating into fertile ground, a quiet suburb, minds softened by routine and the low hum of modern life. It's terraforming reality, one consciousness at a time. The stakes had shifted from personal dread to a species-level horror. I wasn't just watching my neighbors lose their minds, I was watching the front line of an invasion so subtle, so quiet, that no one would ever fire a shot. The enemy wasn't coming in ships from the sky, it was seeping through the windows on a carrier wave of gray light. The escalation became tangible. The synchronization of the listeners, as I now called them, grew more precise. At exactly 9:13 p.m. every night, a wave of activity would ripple down the street. Lights in houses would dim. Windows would slide open. And the figures would take their places. They began to move more. Not chaotically, but with a shared, deliberate slowness. A coordinated, silent Tai Chi performed by dozens of people in their separate homes. They would raise their arms in unison, turn their heads at the same angle, their movements dictated by the invisible conductor of the signal. My fortress was failing. The blackout blinds only blocked the light, they did nothing to stop the feeling. A low-grade hum had taken up permanent residence in my skull. It was a constant pressure behind my eyes, a faint buzz at the edge of hearing. Sometimes, in moments of quiet, I would find myself standing in the middle of a room, unsure how I got there. I'd catch myself staring at the blacked-out window, feeling a profound and inexplicable longing to pull up the blinds and look out. To join the silent chorus. One night, the hum was particularly bad. It felt like my teeth were vibrating. I was pacing my hallway, a caged animal, when I saw it. The faintest flicker of gray light, not from a window, but from the polished screen of my powered-down television. It pulsed once, twice, then faded. I stared at the blank screen, my own reflection a pale, terrified ghost on its surface. And for a split second, my reflection wavered. It stretched, elongated, my head tilting at a sharp, unnatural angle. I saw the silhouette of a static wearing my face. I yelled and scrambled backward, crashing into the wall. I didn't sleep that night. The contagion was in my house. The receivers weren't just the windows anymore, they were any polished, reflective surface. My TV, the glass on a picture frame, the screen of my phone. The signal was finding new antennas. My conversations with Cassandra_V grew more desperate. She was my only ally, a faceless name on a screen who understood the encroaching madness. She told me of others, scattered across the globe, who reported similar phenomena, strange radio signals, behavioral loops, sensory distortions, all localized, all dismissed by the sane world. She called them pockets of resonance. Maple Creek Lane was one such pocket. A strong one. You have to disrupt the broadcast, she wrote. But be careful. Fighting it can draw its attention. Sometimes the safest thing to do is to learn the song and hum along. The thought was seductive. To give in. To walk to the window, open it to the cold night air, and let the quiet, gray peace wash over me. To stop fighting the hum in my head and just listen. The sheer exhaustion of my vigilance was a powerful argument for surrender. The final push came from little Leo. It was a Saturday afternoon. The first snow of the season had fallen, a thin, pristine blanket over everything. The world outside was bright and muffled. I risked a peek through my blinds. Jaspreet was in her front yard with Leo, helping him build a snowman. It was a scene of such perfect, painful normalcy. Then Jaspreet's phone rang. She turned away, walking toward her front porch to take the call. Leo was left alone with the half-finished snowman. He stood still for a moment. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion that was utterly alien to a 4-year-old, he turned to face their large living room window. The window, even in the bright afternoon light, held a faint, telltale flicker. Leo took a step toward it. Then another. He stopped at the edge of the frosted lawn, his back to me, his head tilted up toward the glass. He raised one tiny, mittened hand and held it out, palm forward, as if trying to touch something on the other side. Something inside me snapped. This wasn't about bored adults zoning out. This was a child. The signal wasn't just overriding idle minds, it was taking root in new ones. I couldn't let it have him. Cassandra's warning echoed in my mind, fighting it can draw its attention, but I no longer cared. Hiding wasn't enough. I had to do something. My mind raced, tumbling through the facts I had gathered. The old relay station. Low-frequency broadcasts. Interference patterns on radios and TVs, interference. That was the key. You couldn't destroy a radio wave, but you could jam it. You could flood the frequency with noise. My gaze fell on my office. It was a temple of technology. I had my new MacBook, an old iMac, a spare PC tower, 2 monitors, tablets. The basement was a graveyard of electronics I hadn't had the heart to throw out after the divorce: Sarah's old CRT television, a collection of ancient radios, broken speakers, a VCR. An idea began to form, born of desperation and my intimate knowledge of digital noise. I wasn't an engineer. I wasn't a soldier. I was a graphic designer. But I knew how to create static. I knew how to make a mess. I spent the rest of the day hauling the electronic corpses up from the basement. I plugged everything in, a tangled nest of power cords and extension cables. I arranged them all in my living room, pointing them toward the blacked-out window like a bizarre electronic arsenal. The old CRT TV, the radios tuned to the empty space between stations, the monitors set to display a chaotic loop of pure digital noise I designed myself, a visual cacophony of black and white pixels firing at random. My plan was insane. A desperate, unscientific prayer. I was going to fight a reality-bending phenomenon with electronic junk. As dusk fell, I stood in the middle of my living room, surrounded by humming, buzzing, static hissing machines. The air crackled with energy. The hum in my own head was drowned out by the noise I had created. At 9:12 p.m., I took a deep breath. With my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, I grabbed the cord for the blackout blind and yanked it up. I was declaring war. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The blind shot up, exposing the night. Across the street, the silent ballet had begun. Windows glowed with that sick, gray light. Figures stood in their silent, synchronized reverence. The Hendersons. The Gables. Raj. All of them, bathed in the flicker, their movements slow and coordinated. The full, horrifying scale of it laid bare. I hit the master power strip. My living room exploded with noise and chaotic light. The old CRT TV blared a snowstorm of static. The radios hissed and spat. My monitors flashed their strobing, pixelated epilepsy. It was a barrage of electromagnetic garbage, a brute force denial of service attack on reality itself. I was throwing every bit of meaningless information I could generate out my window, a scream of digital chaos aimed at the heart of the creeping silence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the flicker in the Hendersons' window wavered. It fluttered like a candle in a hurricane. The gray light seemed to thin, to become watery and indistinct. Across the street, Mr. Henderson stopped his slow, sweeping arm motion. He blinked. He shook his head, a gesture so profoundly human it almost made me weep. He looked around his own living room as if seeing it for the first time in weeks, then turned from the window, his trance broken. Next door, the light in the Gables' window sputtered and died completely, plunging their living room into darkness. A small victory. A gasp of clean air in a suffocating room. But my triumph was short-lived. The effect wasn't uniform. Further down the street, the flicker in some windows intensified, pulsing erratically as if fighting back. The figures inside didn't awaken. Instead, their movements became jerky, distorted, like corrupted animation files. My noise wasn't a clean jam, it was interference. I hadn't silenced the song, I had just introduced a discordant, shrieking feedback loop. Then I looked at my own window. The glass was vibrating from the sonic assault inside, but it was also beginning to glow. Not with the familiar gray flicker, but with a new, furious, multicolored static. My barrage of noise wasn't just projecting outward, it was being absorbed, reflected, and analyzed. I scrambled for my camera, snapping pictures of the phenomenon I was creating. Later, hunched over my laptop while the house hummed and roared around me, I saw the truth. It wasn't about the old relay tower, not entirely. That was just the source of the carrier wave, the dial tone. The real signal, the information itself, was coming from the listeners. They weren't just receivers, they were becoming transmitters, creating a peer-to-peer network of consciousness, with the windows as their interfaces. My jamming had disrupted their connection, forcing the network to reroute, to strengthen its signal, to focus on the source of the interference, me. And in the chaotic, colorful static of my own window, my camera captured something new. Hidden in the digital noise were patterns. Not the faint, ghostly outlines of the echoes, but something sharp, geometric, and infinitely complex. They were intricate, fractal, like crystalline structures or circuit diagrams. As a graphic designer, I could recognize it. It wasn't noise. It was data. Raw, compressed, terrifyingly dense information. I had thought I was looking at a ghost story, a haunting. I was wrong. I was looking at a firmware update for the human race. I shut everything down. The sudden silence was deafening. The hum in my skull returned, but it was different now. It was sharper, more focused. It felt inquisitive. I had knocked on the door, and something had answered. Underscore 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 Weeks have passed. It is deep winter now. The snow lies thick and undisturbed on the lawns of Maple Creek Lane. My house is a tomb. The windows are not just blacked out, they are covered with plywood from the inside. I live in perpetual, self-imposed darkness, navigating by the glow of a single lamp. My interference had a lasting effect, but not the one I intended. The nightly ritual has stopped. The windows across the street are dark and closed. The neighbors seem normal again. They wave when they see me on the rare occasions I venture out for supplies. They talk about the weather and the holidays. But their eyes are empty. The placid confusion is gone, replaced by a profound, unnerving calm. The download, I fear, is complete. They are not mindless zombies, they are simply running new software. The quiet contagion hasn't been defeated. It has won, and its victory is silent and absolute. I broke my alliance with Cassandra_V. My last message to her was a warning: don't fight it. You'll only teach it how to fight back better. She never replied. I am the last ghost on Maple Creek Lane. A relic of an old operating system. The hum in my head is a constant companion. The signal is still there, patient, waiting. It learned from my defiance. It knows my patterns, my frequencies. It no longer needs the windows. I spend my days working, trying to lose myself in the familiar logic of color and line. But I can't escape the feeling that I am being watched, not from the outside, but from within. The echoes are not gone. I see them sometimes in the periphery of my vision, tall, thin shadows moving in the darkened corners of my own home. They are no longer placeholders. They are waiting for me. Sometimes, late at night, in the oppressive silence of my sealed house, I turn on my computer. I don't go online. I don't work. I just stare at the blank, black screen. It's the only mirror I have left. I watch my own reflection, searching my face for any sign of change, for any flicker of borrowed light. Tonight, as I stare into the dark glass, my reflection blinks. I do not. The quiet contagion. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. The rain in Manchester has a personality. It's not the dramatic, theatrical downpour of a summer storm, but a persistent, sighing drizzle that seeps into brickwork and bones. It's the kind of weather that makes you question your life choices, like moving to a city with more shades of gray than a burnt-out television. For me, Lena, it was the perfect backdrop for the low-grade hum of anxiety that was the soundtrack to my life. At 26, I was a newly minted therapist, armed with a degree, a mountain of student debt, and a crippling case of imposter syndrome. I spent my days in a cramped, beige office at a community health center in Weathering, a suburb that clung to the southern edge of the city like a damp, weary limpet. I'd listen to people unspool their traumas, their fears, their broken record thought patterns, and then I'd go home to my own tiny flat and wrestle with the same demons, just with better terminology. My routine was my armor. 7 a.m. alarm. Instant coffee that tasted of scorched earth. A glance at the weeping sky. Then the 10-minute walk to the bus stop on Palatine Road. The 192 into the city center, then a connecting bus to the clinic. It was a ritual of profound, comforting mundanity. Until it wasn't. The first time I noticed it, I dismissed it as a trick of the light, a flicker of my own over-caffeinated brain. It was a Tuesday in early October. The usual crowd was at the bus stop, a man in a high-vis jacket reading The Sun, 2 schoolgirls sharing a single earphone, a woman with a pram, and a cluster of about 5 office worker types. The bus was late. The drizzle was its usual, non-committal self. Then it happened. As one, the 5 office workers, 3 men, 2 women, none of whom seemed to know each other, took a single, measured step forward off the curb. They paused for a beat, the traffic hissing past their toes. Then they took a single, precise step back onto the pavement. As they stepped back, they all turned their heads slightly to the right, and a soft, sibilant sound escaped their lips. It was too quiet to be a word, more like a collective exhalation. SSSH. Then, just as quickly, they returned to their previous states. Staring at their phones, looking down the road, adjusting their collars. It was so slick, so synchronized, it was almost invisible. If I'd blinked, I'd have missed it. I blinked anyway, hard. My heart did a familiar little tap dance against my ribs. Stress, I told myself. You're projecting. You spend all day looking for patterns in human behavior, and now you're seeing them everywhere. I chalked it up to coincidence. A weird, statistically improbable coincidence. But it happened again the next day. Same time. Same people. The bus wasn't even late this time. The 192 was just rounding the corner, its red bulk a welcome sight. And just before it pulled up, the 5 of them performed the exact same maneuver. Step forward. Step back. Head turn. SSSH. The man in the high-vis jacket didn't look up from his paper. The schoolgirls were giggling about a TikTok video. I felt a prickle of cold that had nothing to do with the damp air. Did you see that? I wanted to ask someone, anyone. But who? The exhausted-looking woman with the pram? She looked like she had enough on her plate without a strange young woman asking her about phantom synchronized dancing. That night, I tried to bring it up with my friend, David. We were in the Beach Inn, a pub that smelled comfortingly of stale beer and wood smoke. David was the antithesis of my anxiety, a solid, unflappable architectural technician who saw the world in right angles and load-bearing walls. It's the weirdest thing, I said, swirling the condensation on my pint glass. It's like they've rehearsed it. David took a long sip of his ale. A flash mob? Maybe they're practicing for something. No, it's not like that. It's small. And quiet. And they all look like total strangers. It's just this one little movement. I demonstrated with my hands, a clumsy miniature of the real thing. He chuckled. Lena, love. You've been working too hard. It's probably just people getting impatient for the bus, shifting their weight at the same time. You know, like when a flock of birds all takes off at once. But the head turn. The noise. The noise of the traffic. Someone sighing. He reached across the table and patted my hand. His was warm and dry. You're seeing spooks. You need a night off. Let's go to the cinema this weekend. Something loud and stupid with explosions. I let him convince me. He was right, of course. I was wound too tight. My supervisor, Dr. Finch, had told me last week that I was exhibiting signs of vicarious traumatization, absorbing the anxieties of my clients. The bus stop thing was just a new symptom. A harmless, external manifestation of my internal chaos. I resolved to ignore it. For 2 days, I succeeded. I put my headphones in as soon as I left my flat, blasting a podcast about medieval history to drown out the world. I stared resolutely at my feet as I approached the bus stop, focusing on the mosaic of discarded chewing gum on the pavement. I didn't look up until the bus doors hissed open. But on Friday, my phone died mid-podcast. I arrived at the bus stop in silence. And this time, it was different. There were more of them. The original 5 were there, but so was the man who usually wore the high-vis jacket. And one of the schoolgirls. The other one stood beside her, looking confused, tugging on her sleeve. As the bus approached, the group, now 7 strong, performed the ritual. Step forward. Step back. Head turn. And this time, I was close enough to hear the word. It wasn't SSSH. It was a single, whispered syllable. Steady. The girl whose friend had joined the ritual looked panicked. Chloe. What are you doing? Chloe turned back from the curb, her face a mask of placid normality. What? Just waiting for the bus. She seemed to have no memory of what she'd just done. The other girl stared at her, her mouth agape, a mirror of my own shock. I felt a dizzying wave of vindication, followed immediately by a tsunami of dread. I wasn't imagining it. Someone else had seen it. I wasn't the only one. But that confirmation didn't make me feel sane, it made the world feel sick. My sessions that day were a blur. I nodded and made the appropriate murmuring sounds of empathy. But my mind was replaying the scene at the bus stop. Steady. What did it mean? To steady what? Against what? My last client of the day was Mr. Abernathy, a man in his late 70s, referred for hoarding and obsessive-compulsive disorder. He was a gentle, fragile man with eyes that seemed to be looking at a world slightly adjacent to our own. For weeks, he'd been talking about his systems. How he had to arrange the tins in his cupboard just so, how he had to tap the garden gate 3 times before he could enter his own house. It's about maintenance, you see, Dr. Allen, he said that day, his thin fingers twisting a loose thread on his cardigan. People think it's madness, but it's not. It's work. You have to keep things in their proper place. You have to do the little things, every day, or the patterns fray. What patterns, Mr. Abernathy? I asked, my pen hovering over my notepad. Oh, you know. He waved a vague hand. The big ones. The ones that hold it all together. If you stop polishing the silver, it tarnishes. If you stop weeding the garden, the weeds take over. It's the same with everything else. You have to do your part. You have to keep things steady. The word hit me like a physical blow. Steady. I stared at him, my professional detachment dissolving. He wasn't at my bus stop. He lived on the other side of Weathering. He was housebound, for God's sake. Mr. Abernathy, I said, my voice barely a whisper. What happens if the patterns fray? He looked at me, and for the first time, his gaze was sharp and lucid. A profound, bottomless fear swam in his eyes. You don't want to see that, doctor, he said softly. Nobody does. I walked home from the clinic that evening, skipping the bus. The 20-minute walk stretched into an hour as I took detours, peering at other bus stops, watching people in queues outside takeaways, observing crowds waiting at pedestrian crossings. I was looking for the twitch, the tell. The small, synchronized movement that meant the quiet contagion was spreading. I didn't see it anywhere else. Not yet. It seemed confined to my morning commute, a localized pocket of wrongness. But Mr. Abernathy's words echoed in my head. It wasn't a twitch. It was maintenance. It was work. That weekend, I canceled on David. I told him I had a migraine. The truth was, I couldn't bear his rational, well-adjusted presence. I couldn't stand to have my fear dismissed as fatigue. Instead, I spent Saturday huddled in my flat, trying to rationalize it from a clinical perspective. Folie à plusieurs. A shared delusion. But that didn't fit. There was no charismatic leader imposing the belief. It was spreading silently, organically. Like spores on the wind. On Sunday, I bought a small, discreet notebook and a pen. I would become an observer. I would document it. I would apply the scientific method to the creeping madness. I would find the logic, the cause, the diagnosis. That was my role, after all. To analyze the pattern, not become part of it. The thought was a small, cold comfort against the growing unease. My own little ritual to keep things steady. Phase 2, growing awareness and isolation. The notebook became my anchor and my tormentor. Its crisp, empty pages demanded evidence, and the world began to supply it in horrifying abundance. My morning walk to the bus stop now felt like a patrol into enemy territory. I'd hang back, pretending to tie my shoe or check my phone, watching. The group was growing. The second schoolgirl, Chloe's friend, had joined them. She no longer looked panicked, she performed the step forward, step back, the turn, the whispered, steady, with the same placid, empty grace as the others. A few days later, a young man who I'd only ever seen jogging past was there, standing stock still, waiting to perform his part. The original 5 were the core, the metronome, but the group was now a dozen strong. They were a silent, shifting choir, and I was the sole, terrified audience. I started filming. Hiding my phone in my palm, I'd try to capture the ritual. But something always went wrong. The first time, the video file corrupted, leaving me with a 3-minute recording of pixelated gray static. The second time, a lorry rumbled past at the exact moment of the ritual, its bulk obscuring my view completely. The third time, my phone simply shut down, its battery supposedly full a moment before. It felt less like bad luck and more like active, targeted interference. The pattern did not want to be recorded. My attempts to talk about it became more desperate and more alienating. I cornered David in a coffee shop, my notebook open on the table between us, filled with diagrams, dates, and times. "Look," I said, my voice tight. 9 days. The group has doubled. The demographic is widening. It's not a flash mob, David. It's something else. He looked at my frantic scribbles, then at my face. Concern was warring with pity in his eyes. "Lena, this is becoming an obsession. Have you talked to Dr. Finch about this? About how much it's stressing you? She'd think I'm having a psychotic break. You're supposed to be my friend. I'm asking you to just, believe me. Come with me tomorrow morning. See it for yourself." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right. Fine. I'll come. I'll be there at 7:30. That night, I barely slept. I was wired with a mixture of hope and fear. If he saw it, I wouldn't be alone anymore. We could figure it out together. But when I got to the bus stop the next morning, David was already there, looking cold and annoyed. And the group was gone. Not the people, they were there. The office workers, the schoolgirls, the jogger. But they were just people at a bus stop. They fidgeted, they checked their watches, they stared blankly into space. When the 192 arrived, they just shuffled on. There was no ritual. No synchronicity. Nothing. "Well," David said as we took our seats on the upper deck. "I'm here. I'm watching. See anything weird?" I felt a hot flush of shame and confusion. They didn't do it today. "Or maybe," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "they never did. Maybe you've built this up in your head so much that you expect to see it, so you do." "No," I whispered, staring out at the gray streets. "That's not it." But my voice had no conviction. He'd seen nothing. Was he right? Was my mind so powerful, so broken, that it could conjure entire phantom rituals? The isolation I felt was no longer just a feeling, it was a physical wall, pressing in on me from all sides. David didn't believe me. He thought I was losing my mind. And for the first time, I started to wonder if he was right. My work suffered. During a session with a young woman struggling with social anxiety, I found myself zoning out, staring at the way she rhythmically tapped her finger against her knee. Is that it? A part of my brain screamed. Is that her version? I had to physically shake my head to clear the thought. I was seeing the pattern everywhere. The way the receptionists at the clinic both answered the phone with the exact same inflection. The way the pigeons in the city square seemed to peck at the ground in a recurring, 3-beat rhythm. The world was a chaotic mess of data, and my brain was desperately trying to impose an order that wasn't there. Or one that was, and was terrifying. The subplot of my life, Mr. Abernathy, continued its grim trajectory. His daughter called the clinic, frantic. He'd had a breakdown. He'd barricaded himself in his living room, shouting that the inspectors were coming because he'd missed a sequence. He kept talking about the warp and the weft, his daughter sobbed over the phone. That the threads were coming loose. He's been taken to hospital. For assessment. The threads were coming loose. The patterns were fraying. Mr. Abernathy was my canary in the coal mine, and he had just stopped singing. His obsession wasn't just a personal neurosis, it was a response to the same thing I was seeing. He wasn't creating the pattern, he was terrified of failing it. The incident with Mr. Abernathy galvanized me. This wasn't just in my head. I decided to change my approach. The contagion, whatever it was localized to my bus stop. What was unique about that spot? I spent a weekend doing the only kind of research I could think of. I went to the Manchester Central Library, diving into local history archives. Weathering was an unremarkable suburb, built on former marshland in the late 19th century. Palatine Road was just a road. But then I found it, buried in a dusty, leather-bound volume of local folklore from the 1880s. It was a short, strange entry, written by an amateur antiquarian. The villagers of the old Weathering hamlet hold a curious belief regarding the Marsh Road, now Palatine. They speak of a thinness in the air there, a place where the veil between worlds is worn. To ensure safe passage and to keep the bog walkers in their place, a small observance is required. A step towards the marsh, and a step away, a turning of the head to acknowledge the unseen, and a quiet word to affirm the solidity of our own world. A failure to perform this small duty, they believe, invites imbalance. Bog walkers. The veil between worlds. It sounded like superstitious nonsense. But the description of the observance. A step towards the marsh. A step away. A turning of the head. It was my ritual. It wasn't new. It was ancient. A cold dread settled deep in my stomach. This wasn't a social contagion. It wasn't a shared psychosis. This was something else. Something woven into the very fabric of the place. The people at the bus stop hadn't invented a new, strange habit. They had remembered an old, necessary one. The next Monday, I went to the bus stop armed with this new, terrifying knowledge. I saw them not as victims of a strange mental affliction, but as unwitting guardians. But then something happened that shattered my neat, if horrifying, theory. David was there. He wasn't there for me. He was on his way to a site visit, he said, his face a little pale. We stood in awkward silence. And as the 192 rounded the corner, I watched him. His eyes unfocused slightly. His body went rigid. And then he did it. A single, measured step forward. A single, precise step back. A slight turn of the head to the right. And from his lips, so quiet I almost didn't hear it, the word. Steady. He blinked, turning to me with a faint, polite smile, as if seeing me for the first time. Morning, Lena. Bus is here. He got on, leaving me frozen on the pavement. The wall of isolation I'd felt before was nothing compared to this. It was absolute. The contagion wasn't just spreading, it had taken the last person in the world I thought was safe. I looked at the faces on the bus as it pulled away, David, the office workers, the schoolgirls, and they were all just blank commuters. But I knew better. They were part of it now. They were all doing their part. And I was the only one left who wasn't. My research had given me a terrifying context, but it had also deepened my paranoia. Was the observance real? Or was this just a red herring, a historical coincidence my pattern-seeking brain had latched onto? The story of the bog walkers felt like a metaphor, a folk explanation for something more insidious. Was it a side effect of some new technology? A chemical in the water supply that activated some dormant genetic memory? Or was the folklore literally true? That the world I knew was a thin crust over something else, and these little rituals were the only thing stopping it from breaking? I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff in the dark. I didn't know how far the drop was, or what was at the bottom, but I could feel the ground crumbling under my feet. The world was no longer a stable, solid place. It was a performance, a carefully choreographed dance to maintain an illusion, and I was the only one who had forgotten the steps. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The contagion, or the observance, as I'd started to call it in my notebook, began to change. It was no longer confined to the bus stop. The quiet wrongness was seeping into the wider world, like ink bleeding through paper. The escalation was as subtle as its onset, but infinitely more threatening. I started noticing what I called pattern echoes. A cashier at the supermarket would tap a product 3 times before scanning it. A group of teenagers loitering in the park would all fall silent and stare at the same patch of sky for a beat before resuming their conversation. At the clinic, I saw Dr. Finch, my unflappable supervisor, pause before entering her office, her hand hovering over the doorknob as she muttered something too low to hear. She then entered as if nothing had happened. When I met her eyes, they were placid, unrecognizing. These weren't the coordinated ritual of the bus stop, but variations on a theme. Individual performances, personal contributions to the great, silent score. Mr. Abernathy's talk of sequences and maintenance now seemed chillingly prescient. It was a distributed effort to keep the threads from fraying. The environmental warping grew more pronounced. It was never overt, always lurking in my peripheral vision. I'd see a shadow detach itself from a lamppost and skitter across the road before dissolving. I'd catch a glimpse of my reflection in a shop window, and for a split second, my face would be distorted, my features rearranged into an impossible, geometric configuration. The low hum of the city's electricity, something I'd never consciously noticed before, now seemed to have a cadence, a rhythm that scraped at the edges of my hearing. My isolation was a tangible thing, a bubble of awareness in a sea of placid participation. I was the glitch in the system. And the system was starting to notice. People began to look at me differently. Not with hostility, but with a kind of mild, corrective confusion, the way you might look at a picture hanging crookedly on a wall. On the bus, people would shift slightly in their seats to put more distance between us. In queues, a space would naturally open up around me. I wasn't being shunned, I was being edited out. I was a discordant note in a symphony that was striving for perfect harmony. Desperate for an ally, I thought again of the second schoolgirl, the one who had initially been panicked when her friend Chloe joined the ritual. I didn't know her name, but I knew which school she attended from her uniform. I waited near the gates one afternoon, feeling like a predator. When I saw her, I approached cautiously. "Excuse me," I said. "I saw you at the bus stop a few weeks ago. With your friend, Chloe. You looked worried." She stared at me, her young face a polite blank. "I'm sorry." "The thing they do," I pressed, my voice dropping to a whisper. "The little dance. The step forward and back. You saw it. You were scared." She frowned, a tiny V appearing between her eyebrows. It wasn't a frown of remembrance, but of concern. "For me. Are you all right, miss? We just wait for the bus. Maybe you should have a sit down. You look a bit peaky." She walked away, rejoining a group of friends who cast wary glances in my direction. My last potential ally was gone, absorbed into the whole. Her memory of the event, her initial fear, had been wiped clean, overwritten by the pattern. It wasn't just that they didn't remember doing the ritual, it seemed they didn't remember a time before it. My theory began to solidify, a horrifying structure built from folklore, observation, and fear. This wasn't a disease or a poison. It was a reality editing protocol. A low-level, constant maintenance routine to patch holes in the fabric of our world. The bog walkers from the old text weren't literal monsters, they were a metaphor for whatever existed in the thinness, the raw, chaotic code that lay beneath our perceived reality. When a hole appeared, the protocol would kick in, co-opting the nearest humans to perform the necessary patch, a synchronized action, a specific thought form encapsulated in a word like steady. And I, for some reason, my anxiety, my analytical mind, some quirk of my own brain chemistry, was immune. Or worse, incompatible. I couldn't be used by the protocol, so I was simply an error to be bypassed. The stakes escalated when I tried to leave. The idea came to me in a fit of claustrophobia. I had to get out of Weathering, out of Manchester. I packed a small bag, booked a train ticket to London on my laptop, and walked to Piccadilly Station, my heart pounding with a desperate hope. If I could just get away from the epicenter, maybe I could escape it. The station was a chaotic symphony of normal life. Announcements echoed, people rushed for their platforms, the smell of coffee and diesel hung in the air. For a moment, I felt a surge of relief. This was the real world. Solid. Unchanging. My train was on platform 6. I walked towards the barrier, my ticket held out. The automatic gate beeped and flashed red. Seek assistance. I tried again. Red. A transport police officer nearby watched me with a neutral expression. I moved to the manned gate. Ticket's not working, I said to the attendant. He scanned it. Says here it's been cancelled, miss. What? No, I just bought it an hour ago. Says it was cancelled and refunded 2 minutes after purchase. He looked at me with that same placid, corrective gaze I'd come to dread. Are you sure you meant to travel today? My blood ran cold. I checked my banking app. He was right. A full refund had been issued. I hadn't done it. I stumbled back into the main concourse, dizzy with panic. I tried to use a ticket machine. My card was declined. I tried to withdraw cash from an ATM, transaction cannot be processed. I was being contained. The system wasn't just observing me, it was actively manipulating my reality to keep me in place. My bank, the train line's booking system, they were all just nodes in a larger network, and they had received an instruction: Lena Allen does not leave. I stumbled out of the station into the gray afternoon. The city hummed around me, no longer a comforting urban thrum, but the sound of a vast machine working perfectly, a machine I was trapped inside. My professional life provided the final, terrifying piece of the puzzle. The clinic called me in for an unexpected performance review. Dr. Finch sat opposite me, her hands folded neatly on her desk. Another senior partner, a man I barely knew, was also present. Lena, Dr. Finch began, her voice calm and even. We've been reviewing your case files. Particularly your notes on Mr. Abernathy. She slid my notebook across the table. My private notebook. The one I kept locked in my desk drawer. We're concerned about some of the language you're using, she continued. Pattern echoes. Reality editing protocol. Observance. This is not the language of clinical therapy, Lena. This is the language of delusion. Mr. Abernathy was trying to tell us something. I protested, my voice shaking. He knew. He was part of it, and he was failing. Mr. Abernathy is a very sick man, the senior partner said, his voice smooth as oil. And it seems his illness may be contagious. He wasn't talking about a psychological contagion. He was talking about me. They saw me as the source of the madness, not the observer of it. Dr. Finch leaned forward. We think you need to take some time off, Lena. A leave of absence. To get steady. There it was again. Steady. It wasn't a plea or a suggestion. It was a command. A diagnosis. I was the imbalance that needed correcting. The crooked picture that needed to be straightened. They weren't trying to fire me. They were trying to fix me. I walked out of the clinic and didn't look back. I was unemployed. I was financially trapped. I was utterly alone. The world was no longer my home, it was my ward. The quiet contagion wasn't something happening to the world. It was the world. The real contagion, the real sickness, was my awareness of it. And it was becoming increasingly clear that the system had decided it was time for my treatment to begin. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. My flat, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. The hum in the walls was louder, a constant, resonant note that seemed to vibrate in my teeth. The shadows in the corners of my eyes were bolder, stretching and contracting in time with a rhythm I couldn't place. My world had shrunk to these four walls, and even here, the quiet wrongness was closing in. My money was gone. My card was just a useless piece of plastic. My attempts to call my parents were met with a disconnected tone. The network was isolating me completely, cutting my last few ties to the world I used to know. It was a soft, silent, bureaucratic siege. They weren't coming for me with weapons, they were simply waiting for me to break. To run out of food. To run out of hope. To be ready to accept the cure. For 3 days, I subsisted on stale crackers and tap water, jumping at every creak of the floorboards, every rattle of the window frame. Sleep offered no escape, only feverish dreams of impossible geometry and whispering crowds all murmuring the word steady, steady, steady. I was fraying, just like Mr. Abernathy's patterns. My own internal logic was starting to buckle under the strain. What if they were right? What if this whole thing, the bus stop, the folklore, the shadows, was a grand, intricate delusion constructed by my anxious mind? The thought was a tempting off-ramp, a path back to a world that made sense. But I couldn't take it. The memory of David's face, that flicker of blankness before he performed the ritual, was too real. The cancelled train ticket was too real. My isolation was too real. On the fourth morning, I woke up with a strange sense of calm. The anxiety hadn't vanished, but it had clarified into a single point of purpose. I couldn't run. I couldn't fight. But I could face it. I could go to the source. I walked out of my flat and into the pale, pre-dawn light. The streets were empty and silent, but it was not a peaceful silence. It was the held breath before a performance. As I approached the bus stop on Palatine Road, I could see them. They were all there. The core group. The schoolgirls. The jogger. David. Even Dr. Finch stood amongst them, her posture perfect, her gaze fixed on the empty road ahead. There were 30, maybe 40 people. A congregation. They weren't waiting for a bus. They were waiting for me. As I drew near, they all turned their heads in perfect synchronicity. Not to the right, as in the ritual, but towards me. 40 pairs of eyes, all empty of judgment or malice. They were just, looking. Registering the anomaly. Then, a figure detached from the back of the group and walked towards me. It was an elderly woman, someone I recognized vaguely from the neighborhood. She had kind, crinkled eyes, but the kindness wasn't for me as a person. It was the detached, gentle kindness one might show to a frightened animal. She stopped a few feet away. "You've been making such a fuss, dear," she said, her voice a soft, papery whisper. It carried perfectly in the still air. "What is this?" I asked, my voice cracking. "What do you want from me?" "Want?" She seemed to consider the word. "We don't want anything. It's about what's needed. The maintenance. You understand. You read the book." My blood froze. "The folklore." "Folklore is just a story we tell ourselves about the truth," she said with a small, patient smile. "This place is thin. It has always been thin. And when the world gets loud, when there's too much chaos, too much static, it tears. The observance keeps it patched. It keeps things solid. It keeps them steady." She gestured at the world around us. The red brick houses, the damp street, the gray sky. All this. It's an agreement. A consensus. And you're shouting in the library. You can't hear the music, so you think it's silence. Your awareness is a dissonance. A sharp note that weakens the whole composition. Behind her, the crowd took a single, unified step forward. Then back. They turned their heads. Steady, they whispered, and the word was no longer a quiet breath. It was a statement of power. A wave of force that washed over me, making the world shimmer at the edges. For a terrifying instant, I saw it, the thinness. Through the facade of the terraced houses opposite, I saw a roiling, chaotic landscape of impossible colors and screaming, formless energy. The bog walkers. The raw code. The truth behind the illusion. I squeezed my eyes shut, gasping. The old woman's voice was right beside my ear. You see? It's hard work holding it all together. And you're not helping. I opened my eyes. She was still smiling that gentle, terrible smile. You have a choice, Lena, she said. You can continue to be a tear, and eventually, the tear will be snipped away. You'll be edited out. A cancelled ticket is one thing. A cancelled existence is quite another. Or, you can learn your part. You can join the performance. She looked me directly in the eyes, and I felt the last of my resistance crumble. Not to fear, but to a profound, cosmic exhaustion. The exhaustion of being the only one. It's not so bad, she whispered, as if reading my thoughts. And then she delivered the line I knew was coming, the line that had been waiting for me all along. You haven't learned your part yet. But it's all right, dear. We'll teach you. She held out her hand. It was an invitation. An initiation. A sentence. It's a simple step, she said. To keep things steady. I looked from her hand to the faces of the crowd. To David's blank, handsome face. To Dr. Finch's serene, professional one. They were not monsters. They were stagehands, diligently working to keep the scenery from collapsing. My struggle, my fear, my entire sense of self, it was just a distraction from the real work. Slowly, deliberately, I raised my foot. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the bus shelter. My face was pale, my eyes wide with a terror that was already beginning to fade, replaced by a strange, hollow peace. The peace of surrender. I took the step forward. I felt the rhythm settle into my bones, a deep, ancient pulse. The hum of the world resolved into a clear, single note. The chaos I had glimpsed behind the veil receded. I took the step back. I turned my head to the right, my movements becoming fluid, synchronized with the 40 other bodies around me. The old woman smiled, a real smile this time, full of approval. And from my own lips, without my conscious thought, the word emerged, a soft, sibilant whisper that joined the chorus, mending the final tear, smoothing the last discordant note. Steady. The anxiety was gone. The fear was gone. The struggle was over. There was only the pattern. The performance. The quiet, comforting, all-consuming peace of doing my part. The bus was coming. The world was solid. Everything was in its right and proper place. And Lena Allen, the girl who asked too many questions, was gone. There was only the dance. The quiet contagion, the forgotten word. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. The fog in Port Blossom, Oregon, is not a weather pattern, it's a permanent resident. It rolls in from the Pacific, a silent, gray tide that smothers the sharp edges of the world, muffling sound and swallowing the tops of the Douglas firs that crowd the town's borders. For me, Jonathan Ashe, it had always been a source of comfort. The fog was a constant, a soft boundary against a world that was too loud, too bright, too relentlessly new. At 42, divorced and childless, constants were all I had left. My small clapboard house. My 2012 Subaru. My job teaching history at Port Blossom High. History was my true sanctuary. It was a fortress built of facts, of dates and names and causal links, a grand narrative that proved the world wasn't just a chaotic series of present moments. It was a story with a beginning, a middle, and, presumably, an end. My job was to curate a small wing of that fortress, to impress upon the young, restless minds of my students that the past was not dead. It wasn't even past. The first crack in the fortress appeared on a Tuesday. The fog was particularly thick, pressing against the classroom windows like a blind ghost. We were covering the American Civil War, specifically the psychological toll on the soldiers. The trauma of the battlefield, I said, pacing in front of the whiteboard, created a collective scar. This national memory was something the country would grapple with for decades. I turned back to the class. Usually, at least a few were tuned in. Today, 25 pairs of eyes stared at me with a uniform, placid confusion. It was Kayla Miller, a bright girl who usually challenged my interpretations, who raised her hand. "Mr. Ash?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "What's that word you just said?" "The M word." I stopped. "The M word? You mean memory?" A ripple of unease went through the class. A few students shifted in their seats. Kayla nodded slowly, as if the word itself was a foreign object in her mouth. "Yeah. Memory. I don't think I've heard it before." A nervous laugh escaped me. "That's a good one, Kayla. Very funny." But she wasn't smiling. No one was. Another student, a lanky basketball player named Chris, spoke up from the back. "It sounds weird, Mr. A. Like, it's not a real word." I stared at them, my heart beginning a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. A prank. It had to be a well-coordinated, deeply strange senior prank. "Okay, very funny, everyone," I said, forcing a smile. I turned to the whiteboard and picked up a blue marker. I wrote the word in big, clear letters. Memory. I stepped back to admire my handiwork, and a wave of vertigo washed over me. The word looked wrong. The sharp angles of the M and Y felt aggressive. The roundness of the O's seemed like vacant eyes. The letters didn't cohere. They looked like a random assemblage of symbols, a glyph from a dead language. I shook my head, a dull ache starting behind my eyes. Stress. I hadn't been sleeping well. My ex-wife, Claire, had emailed me last week about selling our old shared storage unit, a final severing I'd been dreading. It was just stress. "Memory," I said, my voice sounding thin. "It's the faculty by which the mind stores and remembers information. The recollection of things past." Blank stares. Kayla chewed on the end of her pen. "You mean like, thinking about stuff that happened before?" "Yes, exactly." Relief washed over me. We were getting somewhere. "Why isn't there just a word for that, then?" she asked, genuinely puzzled. "Like, past thinking?" The bell rang, a shrill, merciful sound. The students packed their bags with a quiet efficiency, shuffling out of the room without the usual boisterous energy. They avoided looking at the whiteboard, at the alien word I had written there. I was left alone in the silent classroom, the fog pressing in, the word memory screaming silently from the board. I erased it with frantic, sweeping motions, feeling a profound and inexplicable sense of relief when it was gone. In the staff lounge, I poured a cup of bitter, burnt coffee and found Dave Stevenson, the biology teacher, grading papers. Dave was a cynic, a man who believed the teenage mind was a swamp of hormones and bad music. He was the perfect person to debunk my growing anxiety. "Dave," I began, trying to sound casual, "did your seniors put you up to anything weird today?" "A prank?" He looked up, his glasses perched on his nose. "Weird how?" "Liam Tryon tried to convince me that mitochondria are a government conspiracy." Standard Tuesday. I took a breath. No, weirder. My entire third period class pretended they didn't know the word memory. Dave didn't laugh. He didn't even scoff. A strange stillness came over him. He set his red pen down with deliberate care. "That's specific. Right?" They acted like I was speaking Martian. "And when I wrote it down, it looked wrong. To me. Dave avoided my eyes, focusing on a stack of papers. You're probably overworked, John. End of the semester is a bear. They're just messing with you. Kids pick up on when you're stressed. They go for the jugular. He picked his pen back up. The conversation was over. But he never used the word. He talked around it, a deft conversational maneuver that I only noticed in retrospect. He didn't say, "They have a strange sense of humor," or "I have no recollection of them doing that before." He simply sealed the topic off. The feeling of wrongness followed me out of the school and into the gray afternoon. I stopped at the grocery store, the automatic doors sighing open. The air inside was cold and smelled of disinfectant and refrigerated vegetables. I moved through the aisles on autopilot, my mind replaying the scene in the classroom. At the checkout, a young woman named Cindy, whose mother had been in my class a decade ago, scanned my items. "How's your mom, Cindy?" I asked, a rote question. "She's good. We went to see that new movie yesterday," she said, her voice a flat monotone. "Oh yeah? What did you think?" "It was fine." She stared at the screen of her register. There was no light in her eyes, no trace of the experience. She wasn't sharing a recollection, she was stating a fact, like reading a shipping manifest. On the way out, I passed a bronze plaque bolted to the brick facade. It was dedicated to Arthur Hemlock, the town's founder, who died in a cannery fire in 1912. I'd used that plaque as a teaching tool for years. I glanced at Cindy, who was now wiping down the conveyor belt. "It's incredible to think of him standing right here over 100 years ago," I said, gesturing to the plaque. She followed my gaze, her expression utterly blank. "Who?" "Arthur Hemlock," I said, pointing at the name. "The town founder." She looked back at me, her face a mask of polite incomprehension. "I don't know who that is," she said. "But it's a nice sign." She turned away, her task-oriented focus absolute. It wasn't that she didn't know the history, it was that the very concept of a person existing in the past seemed irrelevant, a piece of trivia with no anchor. My heart hammered. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't stress. Back home, I bypassed the kitchen and went straight to my study. It was my favorite room, lined with bookshelves groaning under the weight of history tomes, biographies, and classical literature. It was a room built of the past. I pulled my worn copy of the Merriam-Webster Collegiate Dictionary from the shelf. My hands were trembling slightly. I felt foolish, like a man checking to see if the sky was still blue. I thumbed through the slick, thin pages. M. Med. Meg. Mech. I found the place where it should have been. Between memoir and memorious. My breath hitched. The entry for memory was gone. It wasn't that the page was torn out. The page was intact. The words memoir and memorious were there, perfectly printed. But between them was a blank space, a pristine white void, about 2 inches long. It was as if the word had never been conceived, the concept never requiring definition. The alphabetical order was preserved, but a crucial link in the chain had simply vanished. My blood ran cold. I dropped the book. It hit the floor with a heavy thud that echoed the frantic beating of my own heart. I was alone in my house, surrounded by the comforting quiet of the fog, and for the first time in my life, I was terrified. The fortress was crumbling around me, and I couldn't see what was tearing it down. I scrambled for another dictionary, a massive, unabridged volume I'd inherited from my father. I heaved it onto my desk, my fingers fumbling with the pages. The paper was older, softer. I found the page. And there it was. For a dizzying second, I felt a surge of relief. But it wasn't a definition. The typeset letters were crisp and black. Memory, N. But below it, where the explanation should have been, there was only a single, italicized line. See page 000. Page 000. My mind raced. A printing error? A cross-reference? I frantically flipped to the front of the book, through the table of contents and the introductory pages. There was no page 0. No page 000. The numbering began, as it always did, with page 1. It was a dead end. A reference to a place that didn't exist. An instruction that led to nowhere. I leaned back in my chair, the room spinning slightly. The fog outside the window seemed to thicken, to press closer, and I had the sudden, chilling thought that it wasn't trying to keep the world out. It was trying to keep me in. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. The days that followed were a masterclass in quiet madness. I started a journal, a simple black moleskine, documenting everything. The act of writing was a comfort, a way to anchor my own sanity. I wrote down the classroom incident, Dave's strange placidity, Cindy's blankness at the grocery store. I described the void in the dictionary. I wrote the word amiamorwai over and over, trying to reclaim it. But with each repetition, it looked more alien, the strokes of my own pen seeming to resist the formation of the letters. It felt like trying to write on water. My life, once a predictable rhythm, became a series of excruciating tests. I tried to talk about movies with colleagues, but they would only describe the plot as if reading a synopsis, with no emotional flavor, no favorite scenes. I asked a neighbor about his vacation to Yellowstone last summer. He looked at me, confused. I was in Yellowstone, he said, as a statement of fact. Now I am here. The past was an acknowledged data point, but it carried no weight, no echo. I began to see the town differently. The people of Port Blossom weren't sad or listless, they were disturbingly efficient. They moved with a serene, present-tense focus. There were no arguments that dredged up old grievances, no sentimental anecdotes shared over coffee. The town ran like a well-oiled machine, free from the friction of regret or nostalgia. The conversations I overheard were purely functional, scheduling, logistics, statements of immediate need. The quiet I had once loved now sounded like an absence, a vast, hollow space where the richness of shared human experience used to be. My isolation deepened. I was a ghost haunting my own life. At school, I modified my lesson plans. History became a series of abstract case studies. The Peloponnesian War was no longer about Athens and Sparta, but a model for resource conflict between rival states. The names, the dates, the stories, the very soul of history, were impossible to convey. My students absorbed the abstract models easily, but the moment I tried to anchor it to a specific, bygone event, their eyes would glaze over. I was speaking a language only I understood. My only hope for an external perspective was my sister, Sarah. She was a graphic designer living in Portland, a world away from the fog of Port Blossom. We weren't close, not since the divorce. She'd sided with Claire, calling me emotionally unavailable, a man living in the past. The irony was a physical ache in my chest. I called her on a Thursday night, the phone feeling slick with sweat in my hand. "John. Is everything okay?" Her voice was sharp, laced with the familiar edge of concern that always felt like accusation. "Yeah, I'm fine. I have a weird question." "Okay. Sarah, do you remember when we were kids? That summer we went to Cannon Beach and Dad tried to teach us how to fly that big dragon kite." I held my breath. The image was so vivid in my mind, the sting of the wind, the bright green of the kite against a gray sky, the sound of Dad's laughter. There was a pause on the line, filled with static. "I know the event you are referring to," she said finally. Her phrasing was stilted, clinical. Not, "Oh my God, yes. Dad spent an hour untangling the string, but I know the event you are referring to." "Right, but do you remember it?" I pressed, the forbidden word feeling heavy on my tongue. The feeling of it? John, what is this? Her voice hardened. That was a long time ago. What's the point of dwelling on it? I have a deadline tomorrow. I'm focused on that. The point is the memory itself, Sarah. The word. Does the word memory mean anything to you? A longer silence. This time it was freighted with a new kind of distance. You're being obsessive, she said, her voice flat and cold. It's not healthy. You need to focus on the here and now. Like everyone else. The line went dead. She had hung up on me. It wasn't just Port Blossom. It was spreading. Or maybe it had already spread, and this little town was just the last place I had noticed. The thought was paralyzing. Was I the anomaly? The one person who was broken because he couldn't forget? Desperate, I turned to the only other place I could think of that valued the past as much as I did, the Port Blossom Public Library. It was a Carnegie building, a stone fortress of knowledge that predated most of the town. Its air was thick with the scent of aging paper and bookbinding glue. At the main desk sat Miss Albright, a woman who seemed as old as the library itself. Her face was a delicate web of wrinkles. Her hair a wispy cloud of white. She had been the town librarian for 50 years. If anyone was a guardian of the past, it was her. I approached the counter, my father's dictionary clutched in my hand like a shield. Miss Albright? She looked up, her pale blue eyes taking a moment to focus. Jonathan Ashe. You haven't been in for a while. Looking for more books on the Byzantine Empire? Her voice was frail, but it held a warmth that had become achingly rare. Something else today, I said, my voice low. I have a question about a particular word. I opened the dictionary on the counter, my finger pointing to the entry for memory and its bizarre cross-reference. I found this. See page 000. Do you have any idea what that could mean? Ms. Albright leaned forward, her eyes squinting at the page. A flicker of something I hadn't seen in weeks crossed her face, recognition. And fear. Her hand, thin and spotted with age, trembled as she reached out and touched the page. Where did you get this? She whispered, her gaze darting around the empty library. It was my father's. She seemed to shrink in on herself. Some books shouldn't be read. They hold on to things that are meant to be let go. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. The past is a heavy coat, Jonathan. It's so much easier to walk without it. Her words were an echo of Sarah's, but her tone was different. It was one of sorrow, not dismissal. She knew. She understood what was happening. What is happening? I begged, my voice cracking. What is page 000? It's not a page, she said, her voice barely audible. She was fading before my eyes, the thread of her awareness fraying. It's a place. The place where things are, unwritten. She straightened up, a placid calm smoothing the lines of fear from her face. Her eyes unfocused. Now, can I help you find a book, sir? We have a wonderful new collection of travel guides. She was gone. The person I had been speaking to a moment before had vanished, replaced by the same serene, present-tense automaton as everyone else. I had lost her, right in the middle of a sentence. I backed away from the counter, a profound and terrifying loneliness washing over me. But she had given me a clue. A place where things are unwritten. And as I stood there, amidst the silent stacks, a subplot I'd been peripherally tracking in my own mind suddenly came into sharp focus. The old Hemlock Cannery on the waterfront. It had been shut down for 70 years, a derelict skeleton of a building. The town council had recently, and with no public debate, voted to transfer its deed to a newly formed, vaguely named, Municipal Heritage Society. There were no records of who was on this society's board. It was a quiet, bureaucratic shift that no one had paid any attention to. The cannery was built on the oldest plot of land in town. I knew this from my own research. On the original 1888 plat map, which I had shown to my students countless times in years past, every lot was numbered. Lot 001, 002, 003, all except for the sprawling parcel of land at the water's edge where the fog was always thickest. That land was designated Lot 000. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The discovery of Lot 000 was a key turning in a lock I didn't want to open. It consumed me. I spent my nights poring over old town records I'd downloaded years ago, documents that now felt like forbidden texts. The Hemlock Cannery. Lot 000. Page 000. The connections were too neat to be a coincidence. It was the source. The epicenter. The world outside my study continued its quiet transformation. The contagion, I had started calling it that in my journal, was no longer just about a single word. It was a fundamental restructuring of cognition. People had stopped using most past tense verbs. Conversations were constructed in the present or immediate future tense. I am going to the store. This coffee is hot. The meeting is at 3. When I tried to ask my principal, Mr. Harris, about a decision made last week, he simply said, "The decision is what it is." We move forward from now. The past wasn't forgotten, it had been surgically excised from the flow of time, leaving a clean, sterile wound. This had tangible, terrifying consequences. The town's small historical museum, once a dusty collection of fishing gear and black and white photos, was now perpetually closed for inventory. The town paper, the Port Blossom Beacon, stopped publishing obituaries. People died, but their existence was simply switched off. There was no public mourning, no celebration of a life lived. One day a person was here, the next they were not. It was the ultimate manifestation of out of sight, out of mind. My own existence became a tightrope walk. At school, I taught a hollowed-out version of my subject. I felt like a fraud, a priest of a dead religion, mouthing rituals that had lost their meaning. My colleagues treated me with a gentle, cautious distance, as one might treat a convalescing patient. They saw my attachment to what was as a peculiar illness, a fever that would hopefully break, allowing me to join them in the bright, unburdened present. The environmental warping grew more pronounced. The fog was my constant companion, but now it seemed to have an intelligence to it. On my drives, it would part to reveal my route a split second before I needed to turn, then close in behind me, erasing the road I had just traveled. Streetlights no longer flickered randomly, they pulsed in slow, rhythmic patterns, like a sleeping heart. I'd catch glimpses of things in my peripheral vision, a lamppost on the corner of Elm and Ocean seeming to bend at an impossible angle for a fraction of a second, the shadow of a fire hydrant stretching the wrong way, away from the sun. When I'd turn to look directly, everything would be normal. I was starting to question whether the world itself was changing, or if my own mind, the last bastion of memory, was the thing that was breaking. My one remaining hope was Ms. Albright. I thought if I could catch her in a moment of lucidity, I might get more. I returned to the library a few days after our last encounter. I found her reshelving books, her movements slow and precise. "Ms. Albright," I said softly. She turned, and for a glorious, heartbreaking second, the fear was back in her eyes. "Jonathan," she breathed. "It gets worse. It's hungry." "What is it?" I pleaded, stepping closer. "Tell me what's in the cannery." "Not in it," she whispered, her hand gripping a book spine so hard her knuckles were white. "It is the cannery. It's the foundation. An anchor, or a drain. It unhappens things. It makes them, not have been." Her eyes darted to the clock on the wall. "History is a story. It's rewriting the book. Tearing out the pages. How do I stop it?" Her face clouded over with confusion. The light was going out. Stop what, dear? Are you looking for a particular author? No, Miss Albright, stay with me. I said, my voice rising in desperation. You were just telling me about the cannery. About page 000. She took a step back, a flicker of alarm on her face, the kind one shows a stranger who is shouting in public. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. I had lost her again. But this time, she had left me with a final, chilling piece of the puzzle. It wasn't just erasing the past, it was unhappening it. I felt a surge of desperate resolve. I had to go to the cannery. I had to see it for myself. But it was on the Historical Society's property now, fenced off. My brief, flickering alliance with Miss Albright had one last gift for me. As she turned away, a small, brass key slipped from the pocket of her cardigan and fell to the carpeted floor with a soft thud. Her placid gaze didn't register it. She simply continued her work. With a trembling hand, I bent down and picked it up. It was an old key, ornate and heavy. I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that it was the key to the Hemlock Cannery. That night, the fog was the thickest I had ever seen it. It was a solid, living thing, a presence that deadened all sound except the frantic thumping of my own heart. I drove the Subaru to the waterfront and parked a block away. The old cannery loomed out of the mist, a skeletal silhouette against a starless sky. Its corrugated metal walls were streaked with rust. Its windows long since shattered, boarded up from the inside. A new chain-link fence surrounded the property, but the gate was secured with a simple padlock. My old, heavy key wasn't for that. It was for the main door. I scaled the fence easily, my shoes landing silently on the damp, overgrown gravel within. As I approached the building, the air grew cold, and a low hum vibrated through the soles of my feet. It wasn't an electrical sound, it was deeper, more fundamental, the sound of a vast, slow-moving engine at the heart of the world. The main entrance was a set of large, rust-fused double doors. In the center was a smaller, man-sized door, its keyhole dark and forbidding. I slid the brass key in. It turned with a grating shriek that seemed to be swallowed instantly by the fog. The lock clicked. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped from the fog of Port Blossom into the source of its contagion. I stepped inside page 000. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The air inside the cannery was not air. It was a thick, pressurized silence. The low hum I'd felt outside was omnipresent here, a vibration that resonated not in my ears, but in my bones, in my teeth. The vast, cavernous space was filled with the same gray fog as the town, but here it swirled with a slow, deliberate purpose, catching in non-existent currents. The distant, boarded-up windows were faint rectangles of deeper black, admitting no light. The only illumination was a diffuse, internal luminescence from the fog itself, a sourceless gray glow. My flashlight beam cut a weak, pathetic cone into the gloom, illuminating rusted machinery, collapsed catwalks, and chains hanging from the high ceiling like metallic vines. But as my light passed over them, the objects seemed to resist. Their edges were fuzzy, their details indistinct, as if they were half-erased sketches. This was not a place of decay, it was a place of deletion. I walked deeper into the building, drawn toward its center. The hum grew stronger, the pressure more intense. My mind felt thick, my thoughts slow and syrupy. I tried to summon a memory, Claire's face on our wedding day, but the image was hazy, the details bleeding away. Her smile, the color of her eyes, they were like words on the tip of my tongue that I couldn't quite grasp. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the mental fog. I was losing myself. In the absolute center of the vast concrete floor, the source of the hum became clear. There was no monster, no machine, no glowing portal to another dimension. There was nothing. It was a perfect circle of absence about 10 feet in diameter. It was not a hole in the floor. The concrete was smooth and unbroken. It was a spot where reality had been nullified. It didn't look black, it looked like nothing. It didn't reflect light. It didn't cast a shadow. It was a void, a wound in space-time, and the fog poured into it in slow, steady streams, like water down a drain. As I stared at it, a voice entered my head. It was not a sound, but a pure, direct transmission of thought, calm and reasonable and utterly alien. The burden is heavy. The thought was not malevolent. It was a simple statement of fact. The accumulation of moments. The weight of what was. It is an error. A friction against the smoothness of is. It creates pain. Regret. Anguish. It is inefficient. My own life flashed before me. The sting of my father's disappointment. The hollow ache of my divorce from Claire. The lonely nights in my quiet house. The faces of students I had failed. Every mistake, every embarrassment, every loss. A lifetime of accumulated hurts. I felt the immense, crushing weight of it all, a burden I carried every single day. Let it go, the presence suggested, its tone one of gentle persuasion. Release the narrative. The past is a ghost. The future a fantasy. Only now is real. Step closer. Be cleansed. Be free. Be here. I felt the pull of it. A profound, seductive promise of peace. I saw what it was offering the people of Port Blossom. Not oblivion, but serenity. A life without the baggage of yesterday. A frictionless existence. No more pain from my failed marriage. No more sorrow for my distant sister. No more loneliness. Just a simple, clear, uncluttered now. It would feel so good. My foot lifted. I took a step toward the circle of nothingness. The fog swirled around me, and in it, I felt my memories begin to dissolve in earnest. My mother's lullaby became a tuneless hum. The smell of my childhood home became just a scent of dust. Claire's name became a sequence of sounds. The word history lost its meaning. And then, a single, sharp image broke through. The dragon kite. The bright green diamond against a steel-gray sky. My father's hand on my shoulder, strong and warm. The feeling of the string vibrating in my own small hands, a living connection to the wind. The sheer, unadulterated joy of that one, perfect moment. It was painful. It was beautiful. It was mine. The pain of its potential loss was greater than the promise of peace. That one memory was an anchor. I grabbed onto it, a drowning man clutching a piece of driftwood. The narrative wasn't just pain. It was joy, too. It was love. It was failure and triumph. It was the chaotic, messy, heartbreaking, glorious story of being human. To erase the pain was to erase the joy. To erase the failure was to erase the triumph. To erase the memory was to erase me. And oh, I thought, screaming the word in my mind with all my remaining strength. The pull ceased. The voice went silent. There was a sense of immense, dispassionate surprise, like a scientist observing an unexpected result. I turned and ran. I scrambled out of the cannery, not daring to look back at the void. I slammed the old door shut, fumbled with the key, and locked it. I scaled the fence and sprinted to my car, my lungs burning, my mind a battlefield of coalescing thoughts and dissolving phantoms. I didn't stop driving until the sun came up and the fog of the Oregon coast was 100 miles behind me. I am writing this in a brightly lit, 24-hour diner in a nameless town in the high desert of Nevada. The air is so dry it cracks my lips. The light is sharp and unforgiving. I have filled 3 Moleskine journals. I am writing down everything I can think of, every story, every name, every date, trying to pour the contents of my mind onto the page before they evaporate. I am building a fortress of words. The waitress comes to refill my coffee. She is young, with a kind smile. Burning the midnight oil, huh, she says. Whatever it is, I hope it works out. Just gotta take things one day at a time, you know. Be in the moment. A chill, colder than any coastal fog, snakes down my spine. I look down at the page in front of me, at the last word I wrote. The letters are familiar, but they don't quite fit together. They look strange. Foreign. A random collection of symbols. Or why? It's starting to look wrong again. I don't know if I escaped the contagion, or if I just brought a piece of it with me. I don't know if it's spreading across the world, or if the world was always this way and I am the one who is finally, irrevocably, changing. I am a ghost, haunted not by the past, but by the fact that I am the only one who still carries it. And I don't know how much longer I can hold on. The quiet contagion, sliding streets. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. My world is measured in microns. In the delicate dance of fiber and pigment, in the whisper-thin layers of washi paper that hold the dreams of Edo period Japan. I am a restorer of ukiyo-e, the floating world captured in woodblock prints. My studio, on the second floor of a modest building in the Fushimi ward of Kyoto, smells of aged paper, pine wood, and the faint, sweet scent of rice paste glue. My life is a testament to permanence, to arresting the slow, steady decay of time. I coax life back into faded cherry blossoms and mend the fractured kimonos of long-dead courtesans. Precision is not just my profession, it is my faith. Which is why it began as a personal failing. The first tremor in my reality was the slope of Higurashizaka, the twilight hill I climbed every evening on my way home. For a week, it felt steeper. My calves burned with an unfamiliar ache, my breath catching sooner than it should. I blamed the oppressive humidity of late summer. The long hours hunched over a print of Hokusai's great wave, my focus narrowing my world to a single, curling crest of Prussian blue. I was 31, I told myself. Perhaps this was just the beginning of the body's slow betrayal. Then came the sign for the Yamazaki bakery. I had passed it every day for 6 years. It was a simple, hand-painted sign. Yamazaki Pan. One morning, the first character, Yama, mountain, was different. It was now written as. Still pronounced Yama in some contexts, but obscure, marine, meaning a fish trap or a marsh. It looked jagged, wrong. I stopped, staring, my grocery bag digging into my wrist. The morning sun cast my long shadow behind me. I took out my phone, squinting at the screen, then at the sign. Had it always been that way? Had I, a person whose entire career was built on noticing minute detail, been wrong for 6 years? The thought was more disturbing than a simple misremembering. It felt like a gaslight from the universe itself. I shook my head and walked on, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. My apartment was in a small, 3-story building sandwiched between a sleepy, family-run tea shop and a patch of meticulously tended bamboo. It was my sanctuary. But the sanctuary was breached a few days later. The hum. The refrigerator, the air conditioner, the faint electrical thrum of the city itself, it all seemed to have dropped a semitone. It was a low, mournful drone that settled in my bones, a sound on the edge of hearing that made my teeth ache. I tried to explain it to my neighbor, Mrs. Sato, when we met by the mailboxes. Sato-san, I began, trying to sound casual, have you noticed any strange noises lately? A humming sound? She gave me a warm, crinkly smile, her eyes disappearing into folds of cheerful skin. Ah, Natsumi-chan, that's just the cicadas getting ready for their final song. They are very loud this year, aren't they? But it wasn't the cicadas. Their frantic, shimmering cry was the soundtrack to every Kyoto summer. This was something else. Something underneath. A baseline of wrongness. The most unnerving incidents were visual, fleeting, and impossible to confirm. A shadow stretching the wrong way from a telephone pole at noon, pointing east instead of north. The reflection of a red car in a puddle appearing blue for a split second. The alley I sometimes used as a shortcut, a narrow passage between a concrete wall and a mossy stone fence, seemed to narrow one afternoon, the walls pressing in, the air growing thick and cold. I backed out, my heart hammering, and took the long way around. When I peeked back around the corner, it looked perfectly normal again. I started keeping a journal, a small, leather-bound notebook I usually reserved for pigment recipes. My entries began as rationalizations. August 14th, hill feels steep again. Must join a gym. August 16th, bakery sign still has the marsh kanji. I must have invented the memory of the other one. Stress-induced false memory. Looked it up online. It's a thing. August 19th, the low hum is persistent. Could be tinnitus. Made a doctor's appointment. I was building a fortress of logic against the encroaching tide of the bizarre. My work became my only refuge. In the studio, under the focused glow of my magnification lamp, the world held. The paper fibers were where they should be, the lines of the woodblock carvings were constant. Here, I was in control. Here, reality was stable. My mentor and the studio's owner, Tanaka-san, was a man who seemed as permanent as the ancient temples scattered across the city. His hands, gnarled and stained with a century of ink, could perform miracles. He could spot a forgery from 10 paces and tell you the region a piece of paper came from by its feel alone. "You seem distracted, Natsumi-san," he said one afternoon, not looking up from a delicate print of a geisha. He was using a fun koge, a small, boat-shaped brush, to gently coax a crease from the paper. "I'm sorry, sensei," I mumbled. "Just, not sleeping well." "The world is full of distractions," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The key is to have a place where it cannot touch you. For us, it is here. The paper remembers. The ink holds its truth. Trust it." I wanted to. I clung to his words like a prayer. The paper remembers. But what if the world forgot? The incident that finally shattered my fortress of denial happened on a Tuesday. I was walking past the small, local shrine, the one dedicated to Fudo Myoo, the immovable wisdom king. His statue, carved from dark stone, stood in a small alcove, perpetually fierce, his face a mask of divine rage to scare away evil. He held a rope in one hand and a sword in the other. But that day, the sword was gone. Not broken off. Not stolen. The stone of his hand was closed in a smooth, seamless fist. There was no mark, no chip, no sign a sword had ever been there. It was as if the sculptor, centuries ago, had decided on a fist instead of a blade. My breath hitched. I knew that sword. I had sketched it once, fascinated by its intricate, flame-like pommel. I touched the cold, unblemished stone of the fist. Smooth. Perfect. Old. A woman was sweeping the stone steps with a bamboo broom. I approached her, my voice trembling slightly. "Excuse me. The statue. Fudo Myoo, didn't he used to have a sword?" She paused, leaning on her broom, and looked at the statue as if seeing it for the first time. "A sword? No, I don't think so. He has his rope to bind up evil passions. A fist is enough to crush illusion, don't you think?" She smiled placidly and returned to her sweeping, the rhythmic scrape of bamboo on stone the only sound. I stood there for a long time, the world tilting on its axis. The hum was louder now, a resonant frequency that seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath my feet. The woman's dismissal was not argumentative. It was a simple statement of fact, a fact from a world I no longer recognized. It wasn't just that things were changing. It was that the memory of what they were before was being erased from everyone but me. I was the ghost, haunted not by the past, but by a present that no one else could see was a fabrication. I walked home, and for the first time, I didn't just feel like I was going mad. I felt terrifyingly, utterly alone. Phase 2, growing awareness and isolation. The world began to unravel faster after that. The changes were no longer confined to the periphery, they were creeping into the heart of my daily life. The placid denial of others was the most disorienting part. It was a soft, impenetrable wall. Pointing out a discrepancy was like telling someone the sky was green. They would look at you with a kind of gentle pity, a quiet concern for your well-being, before turning back to their blue sky world. My journal entries grew more frantic, the neat script degrading into a desperate scrawl. September 2nd, the stone steps leading to the station. There are 47. I counted them yesterday. Today, 51. I walked back down and counted again. 51, I asked a salaryman walking past me if he remembered how many there were. He looked at me like I was a lunatic. Who counts stairs, he asked, and hurried on. September 5th, the vending machine outside my building now sells a brand of melon soda I've never seen before, Kieran's Dream. The logo is a mythical beast with 3 eyes. Mrs. Sato was buying one. I asked her when they started stocking it. She said she'd been drinking it since she was a little girl. September 9th, colors. The green of the traffic light is too blue. The red of the postbox is too orange. It's subtle, like a filter has been placed over my eyes, but when I try to capture it on my phone's camera, the picture looks normal. The error is in my perception, or the camera is complicit. My isolation became a physical presence, a cold cloak I wore everywhere. At work, I tried to focus, but my eyes would drift to the window, scanning the street below for fresh inconsistencies. Tanaka-san grew more concerned. He would leave cups of herbal tea on my workbench. A silent offering. I wanted to confide in him, to unload the terrifying burden of my observations, but the memory of the shrine keeper's placid face held me back. How could I explain to a man who believed in the immutable truth of paper that the very city around us was a lie? I started taking different routes to work, compulsively documenting the cityscape with my phone, creating a vast, useless archive of a world that might not exist by morning. The alleyways were the worst. They were the city's seams, the spaces in between, and they seemed to be the most pliable. An alley that was a straight shot one day would have a sharp, impossible right-angle turn the next. A cul-de-sac would open into a tiny, forgotten garden I'd never seen, complete with a stone lantern casting a shadow that pointed directly at the sun. I'd blink, and the garden would be gone, the alley a dead end once more. I was living in a waking dream, and I was the only one who knew it. My research led me down digital rabbit holes. I searched for mass hysteria, shared psychosis, environmental perception shifts. I found articles about the Mandela effect, where large groups of people misremembered historical facts or brand names. It was a comforting thought, for a time. Perhaps I was just hyper-aware of a common psychological quirk. But the Mandela effect was about memory. This was different. This was tangible. I could feel the extra 4 steps under my feet. I could touch the cold stone of Fudo Myo's fist. The subplot, the mystery that would eventually intertwine with my own quiet nightmare, arrived in a Polonia wood box. Tanaka-san was commissioned by the wealthy, reclusive Okawa family to restore a set of prints that had been sealed in their family storehouse for over 150 years. The collection was mostly unremarkable landscapes and kabuki actor portraits by minor artists of the late Edo period. A good project for you, Natsumi-san, Tanaka-san said, placing the box on my workbench. It will help you focus. Simple work. No great treasures here, but they must be treated with respect. For a week, the work was a bomb. I lost myself in the familiar process, gently cleaning the surface with the softest of brushes, carefully patching wormholes with custom-toned kozo paper, rehydrating the brittle fibers in a controlled humidity chamber. The prints were predictable. The world they depicted was static. Then I found it, at the very bottom of the box, wrapped in a separate silk cloth. It was a print of a familiar scene, my own neighborhood. It was rendered in a style I'd never seen before, stark and geometric, with an unnerving use of negative space. The artist's seal was a single, complex kanji I didn't recognize, almost like a sigil. But it was the details that made my blood run cold. There was the Yamazaki bakery, its sign clearly painted with the jagged, unfamiliar character. There was the shrine, and in it, the statue of Fudo Myoho, his right hand clenched into a solid stone fist. I traced the lines with a trembling finger. The print depicted the world as it was, not as it had been. It was a perfect, chilling match for my misperceptions. I felt a wave of vertigo, gripping the edge of my workbench to steady myself. This wasn't a product of my imagination. It was real. It was documented. 150 years ago, an artist had depicted a version of my neighborhood that shouldn't exist, a version that was slowly, piece by piece, overriding my own. My search for answers took on a new, feverish intensity. I started with the artist's sigil. I cross-referenced it in every database of Japanese art I could access. Nothing. It was as if the artist didn't exist. I researched the Okawa family, hoping for a clue. They were old money, industrialists from the Meiji era, known for their secrecy. Their storehouse was a local legend, said to contain all manner of strange and forgotten things. Then came the next step in the sequence, the one that cemented the print as a prophecy, a blueprint for the encroaching madness. The print showed the flight of stone steps leading to the station. I held it under my lamp, my heart a frantic drum. I counted the steps in the image. Etched in fine black lines. 51. The next morning, I walked to the station, the print clutched in my hand inside a protective folder. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, my eyes closed. I felt sick. When I opened them, I saw it. At the top of the stairs, where there had always been a simple metal railing, there now stood a small, stone Jizo statue, the guardian of travelers and children. It hadn't been there yesterday. I knew, with the certainty of a condemned prisoner, that it had never been there in my entire life. I looked down at the print in my hands. And there it was. In the upper right-hand corner, rendered in the same stark style, was the small, unassuming form of the Jizo statue, watching over the 51 steps. The print didn't just match the changes that had already happened. It showed the changes that were yet to come. The world wasn't just sliding. It was being redrawn from an ancient, impossible template. And I was holding the schematics. I tried to tell Tanaka-san. I had to. I cornered him at the end of the day, my voice low and urgent. "Sensei," I said, laying the print on the clean surface of his desk. "Look at this. Please. Look closely." He adjusted his spectacles, his gaze sweeping over the image. He noted the unusual style, the masterful line work. A curious piece. An unknown master, perhaps. "No, Sensei, you don't understand," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "This is my neighborhood. And this is what it looks like now. The bakery sign. The statue's fist. The steps to the station. They've all changed to match this print." He looked from the print to my face, his expression softening with concern. "Natsumi-san, art often captures a truth we fail to see. Perhaps the artist simply had a keen eye. Perhaps these things were always as they are, and you are only now noticing them. The Jizo statue was not there yesterday." The words burst out of me, louder than I intended. He placed a calming hand on my arm. "Natsumi-san, I have walked past that station for 50 years. The little Jizo has always been there. My wife leaves him a small flower every week." His words hit me harder than a physical blow. The Jizo hadn't just appeared. The timeline had been retroactively altered. History itself had been rewritten, memories implanted, a new past paved over the old one. Tanaka-san's wife's weekly ritual was a memory of something that had never happened in my world. He was looking at me with deep, genuine worry. He saw a brilliant, fragile student cracking under pressure. He didn't see the truth. He couldn't. He was a part of the new design, his memories seamlessly patched. I retreated, mumbling an apology. I took the print and locked it in my personal drawer. It was my secret. My curse. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by my window, watching the streetlights flicker in the silent streets below. Their patterns seemed less random now, more deliberate. Like Morse code. Like the twitching of a vast, sleeping creature, dreaming my world into a new shape. The isolation was absolute. I wasn't just alone in my perception, I was an anomaly, a rogue data point in a system that was perfecting its own consistency. And the system was closing in. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The discovery of the prints didn't bring relief, it brought a more refined, more potent form of terror. The what was no longer a mystery. Reality was being overwritten according to a blueprint. But the why and the how remained locked in an abyss of horrifying speculation. Were the prints a cause or an effect? A magical act of creation, or a recording of a process already in motion? I began treating the Okawa collection not as a restoration project, but as a trove of enemy intelligence. I handled each print with surgical precision, photographing every detail before starting my work. I found 3 more prints depicting my small corner of Fushimi. Each one contained new, terrifying alterations. One showed the little bridge over the canal near my apartment. In the print, the simple wooden railings were replaced by ornate ironwork depicting intertwined carp. A week later, they were there, gleaming with a fresh coat of black paint that somehow already had a patina of age. When I touched the cold metal, a man walking his dog smiled at me. Beautiful, aren't they? The city installed them last spring. I had walked over a plain wooden bridge yesterday. Another print showed the front of my own apartment building. The mundane beige stucco was replaced with dark, vertical wooden slats, a style called yakusuji, traditionally made from charred cedar. The change happened overnight. I woke up one morning to a different view from my own window, the light filtering through the slats casting striped shadows across my floor. My key still worked in the lock. Mrs. Sato complimented the new facade, remarking how much more traditional it looked. "I'm so glad the landlord finally decided to do it," she said cheerfully. "It's been on the plans for ages." The dread was a constant companion, a cold weight in my chest. The world had become a stage where the set was being changed around me while I was still performing my scene, and the rest of the cast was improvising flawlessly, acting as if the new props had been there all along. My relationship with Tanaka-san grew strained. He watched me with worried eyes, his kindness a constant, painful reminder of my isolation. He started assigning me simpler tasks, prints from other collections, as if to pull me away from the source of my obsession. But I would sneak glances at the Okawa prints whenever he was out of the studio. They were my only connection to the truth, however terrifying. One afternoon, I made a discovery that shifted my understanding of the threat. Tucked into the silk wrapping of the final, most disturbing print was a tiny, folded piece of paper. It was brittle, and I almost mistook it for a stray fragment. I carefully unfolded it under the magnifier. It was a note, written in a spidery, archaic script. The ink remembers what the stone forgets. The paper holds the pattern. Do not look too long, or the pattern will see you. The carver is a hungry sleeper. His dreams need walls. The carver. The carver is a hungry sleeper. The words were cryptic, mythic, but they resonated with a terrifying clarity. This wasn't a technological or psychological phenomenon. It was something older. Something sleeping. And the prints were its dreams. The ink didn't just depict the changes, it was the changes. It was the medium through which the carver's dream bled into the waking world. The final print was the one I feared most. It didn't show a building or a street. It showed the interior of my own workshop. My workbench. My tools. And sitting on the bench was a woodblock. Carved into its surface was a design I had never seen, an intricate spiral of impossible, Escher-like geometry. In the corner of the print, the carver's sigil pulsed with a malevolent energy. The stakes had escalated from my environment to my sanctuary, to myself. The carver wasn't just dreaming the city, it was dreaming its way closer to me. The thought that looking at the prints could somehow make me a part of the pattern, that the pattern could see me, was a new and profound horror. Had my focus, my meticulous study of the prints, drawn its attention? I needed an ally, but Tanaka-san was lost to me, his reality too securely anchored in the new consensus. My search for the Okawa family became desperate. They had commissioned the restoration, they must know something. I found a phone number for their family foundation, a number that had taken me days of searching through obscure business registries. A polite, distant female voice answered. I explained that I was the restorer working on their collection and that I had an urgent question about their provenance. I was met with a wall of courteous obfuscation. The collection was simply an old family possession. Its history was lost to time. But the artist, I pressed, my voice tight. The one with the unusual sigil. I need to know his name. There was a pause on the other end of the line. For a moment, I thought she had hung up. Then the voice returned, its tone suddenly colder, flatter. There is no artist. The prints are very old. You are to restore them and return them. That is all. The note, I blurted out, a wild gamble. The one that mentions the carver. The silence that followed was absolute. It was not the silence of a dropped connection. It was a heavy, deliberate void. I could hear my own breathing, loud and ragged in my ear. Finally, the line clicked dead. My blood ran cold. She knew. The Okawa family knew. They weren't ignorant patrons, they were custodians. Or perhaps, gatekeepers. The next day, the true escalation began. It wasn't a physical change. It was worse. I arrived at the studio, and Tanaka-san was standing by my workbench, looking at the Okawa print of the workshop. "Ah, Natsumi-san," he said, a strange, placid smile on his face. "I was just admiring this piece. The detail is remarkable. Especially the woodblock." My gaze followed his to the print. Then to my workbench. Sitting there, exactly as depicted in the print, was the woodblock. It was made of dark cherry wood, its surface cool and smooth beneath my trembling fingers. Carved into it was the impossible spiral, a design that seemed to fold in on itself, drawing the eye into a dizzying vortex. It hadn't been there when I left yesterday. I had not carved it. Where did this come from? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Tanaka-san blinked, his smile never wavering. "Why, you've been working on it for a week, Natsumi-san. Don't you remember? You said you were inspired by the print. Your finest carving yet, I think. A true masterwork." I stared at him, my mind reeling. My memories were being targeted. The carver wasn't just changing the world around me, it was starting to change me, editing my past, inserting false experiences. Tanaka-san's belief wasn't a product of his reality being different from mine anymore. The carver was trying to make our realities converge by rewriting my own history. I don't remember carving this," I said, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. A flicker of doubt, insidious and terrifying, sparked in my mind. Had I carved it? Had I done it in a fugue state, my hands moving with a skill I didn't know I possessed? "You've been under a lot of stress," he said, his voice a soothing balm of poison. "It's good to see you channeling it into your art." He patted my shoulder and walked away, leaving me alone with the print and its terrifying manifestation. The carver was no longer just dreaming the city. It was dreaming me. And I was beginning to forget what was real. I looked at my hands. They were the hands of a restorer. But for a fleeting, horrifying moment, they felt like the hands of a carver, capable of giving shape to a nightmare. The threat was no longer external. It was inside my head, fighting for control of my own past. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The wood block was the fulcrum. Its presence on my bench, coupled with Tanaka-san's implanted memory of me carving it, was a declaration of intent from the carver. The quiet contagion had breached my last line of defense, my own mind. My journal became my only anchor, a testament to a timeline that now felt as faint as a ghost. I read my own entries, desperately trying to reinforce the memories the carver was trying to erase. The confrontation I had been dreading was not with a monster, but with a choice. For 2 days, I avoided the woodblock, covering it with a cloth. But its presence was a psychic weight, a black hole on my workbench. I could feel it, even when I wasn't looking at it. The impossible spiral seemed to pulse with a silent, hypnotic rhythm. I knew, with a chilling certainty, what was expected of me. The print showed the block. The carver had dreamed the block into existence. The next logical step in this nightmare was to use it. My moment of decision came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. The sky outside was the color of lead, and the rain fell in thick, straight lines, blurring the already unstable world outside my window. Tanaka-san had left for the day. I was alone in the quiet studio, the only sounds the drumming of the rain and the low, ever-present hum of the altered reality. I pulled the cloth off the woodblock. The spiral seemed to writhe in the low light. The note's warning echoed in my mind, "Do not look too long, or the pattern will see you." It was too late for that. The pattern had not only seen me, it had chosen me. My hands moved with a dreamlike autonomy. I picked up a sheet of fine washi paper, its texture familiar and comforting. I prepared the sumi ink, grinding the stick in the stone, the earthy scent filling the air. This was my ritual, my craft. But now it felt like a sacrament for an alien god. What would happen when I made the print? Would it simply be a piece of paper with an image on it? Or would the act of creation be the final key, locking the carver's dream into place? What reality would a print of an impossible, reality-bending spiral create? Would my studio dissolve? Would I? My confrontation was this: I could refuse. I could smash the block, burn the prints, run from the city and hope the contagion was localized. Or I could lean in. I could take the final step, engage with the anomaly on its own terms, and see what lay on the other side. Running felt like a slower form of defeat. The carver was already in my head. Where could I run to? With a strange sense of calm, I chose the latter. I was a restorer. I preserved things. Perhaps the only way to survive this was to become a creator, to understand the process that was unmaking my world. I inked the block. The black ink filled the deep, unnatural grooves of the spiral. I laid the washi paper over it and took up my baron, the simple tool used to press the paper to the block. As I began to rub, applying pressure in smooth, circular motions, the hum in the room intensified. It rose in pitch, becoming a clear, resonant tone that vibrated through the floor, up my legs, into the bones of my arm. The light from my lamp flickered, casting strobing shadows across the room. In my peripheral vision, the corners of the studio seemed to lose their definition, the right angles softening, curving. The world was holding its breath. I peeled the paper from the block. The image was perfect. A black, spiraling vortex on a field of white. It was beautiful and horrifying. As I looked at it, the final piece of the puzzle, the revelation, slotted into place. The carver wasn't just dreaming the world into a new shape. It was creating a new artist. The print of my workshop wasn't a threat, it was an invitation. An apprenticeship. The gradual changes, my unique ability to perceive them, my profession that steeped me in the very medium of the change, it had all been a long, slow process of initiation. I wasn't the victim of the contagion. I was its focal point. Its intended host. Holding the freshly made print, I looked out the window. The rain had stopped. The street below was subtly different again. The tea shop across the way was gone, replaced by a quiet, empty lot overgrown with silver grass that swayed in the breeze. But this time, I felt no panic. No terror. Instead, I felt a strange, profound sense of quiet. The jarring dissonance between my memory and reality was gone. I remembered the lot. I remembered it always being there. The memory of the tea shop was a faint, fading echo, like a dream you can't quite hold on to after waking. The carver had not erased me. It had integrated me. The quiet contagion had found its home. The Okawa family never called back. Tanaka-san continued to praise my newfound carving skills. I never saw the other prints from the collection again. They were returned, my work on them mysteriously complete. I still live in Fushimi. I still work as a restorer. But my world is different now. The streets no longer slide with a nauseating lurch. They flow. I walk them with a new understanding, a new sense of purpose. I am the only one who knows the truth, but the truth no longer feels like a burden. It feels like a secret language. I see the seams of the world, the places where the carver's dream is thinnest, where new things are waiting to be born. Sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet, I return to my workbench. I don't restore old prints anymore. I take out the cherry wood block, the one with the impossible spiral. My hands, which once trembled with fear, are now steady. I am not a prisoner. I am not a ghost. I am a carver, too. I ink the block, choose a fresh sheet of paper, and I make a new print. A small one. I change the color of a single roof tile on a distant pagoda. I add a cat sleeping on a wall where there was no cat before. Tiny alterations. My own quiet contributions to the dream. I am no longer just a chronicler of a world that is fading. I am a co-author of the one that is being born. The fear is gone, replaced by a vast, silent, and unsettling peace. I have adapted. I have survived. And in the quiet contagion of the sliding streets, I have found my place. The quiet tide. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. My world was made of noise. The asthmatic cough of my Honda's 150 cubic centimeters engine, a sound so familiar it was part of my own breathing. The sizzle of oil and garlic drifting from 1,000 apartment windows in Santa Teresa. The percussive chaos of kids playing football in a cobbled alleyway, their shouts echoing off pastel-colored colonial walls. The distant, ever-present pulse of samba or funk karaoke thumping from the favelas that clung to the hillsides like vibrant, living barnacles. I was Raphael, 28 years old, and my job was to navigate this symphony of chaos, delivering acreage and makika in a thermal backpack, a tiny, buzzing insect in the sprawling, humid organism of Salvador. The first thread of silence was so thin I barely noticed it. A delivery to a high-rise in Graca, one of the moneyed neighborhoods where the air was thick with the scent of jasmine and entitlement. The customer, a woman in a silk robe, took the bag from me without a word. Her eyes, a startling shade of green, were fixed on a point over my shoulder, out towards the vast blue expanse of the Bay of All Saints. She just stood there in the open doorway, placid and still, until the silence became a weight and I muttered a calm Lysenka and backed away. A weirdo. The city was full of them. I kicked my bike to life, the engine's roar a comforting blast of normality, and forgot about her. A few days later, I was cutting through Pelourinho at dusk. The historic heart of the city, usually a riot of capoeira circles, the clatter of tourist trinkets, and the competing rhythms of half a dozen drumming troops. But that evening, the main square was subdued. A handful of bars were open, their lights spilling onto the worn cobblestones, but the music was off. Not low, but off. Patrons sat with their beers, staring into the middle distance. No chatter, no laughter. It was the eerie quiet of a power cut, but the lights were on, the refrigerators hummed, and the ceiling fans spun lazily. It felt wrong. Like a film with the soundtrack suddenly muted. Saving on the electricity bill, eh? I joked to a bartender I knew, a big man named Jorge whose laugh was usually a force of nature. Jorge just polished a glass, his movements slow and deliberate. He glanced at me, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, before his gaze drifted back towards the open door, towards the sea. "It's better quiet," he said, his voice flat. That night, I met Tiago. My oldest friend, my brother in all but blood. We had a ritual, cheap cachaca and fried sardines at a kiosk on the Farol de Barra beach, watching the last surfers ride the twilight waves. Tiago was studying marine biology at the university, a fact that filled him with a mixture of intense pride and crippling anxiety. He saw the world through a lens of ecosystems and delicate balances. Lately, his lens had narrowed to a single, obsessive point. "It's wrong, Rafa," he said, not looking at me. He was staring at the line where the darkening water met the bruised purple of the sky. He'd brought a length of string with a weighted nut tied to the end. He kept dipping it into the water by a specific rock, frowning at the wet mark. "What's wrong?" "The sardines. They're a little greasy tonight, I'll give you that." "No. The tide." He gestured impatiently at the ocean. "The charts, the models, the moon, they all say one thing. But the water, it's higher. Not by much. A few centimeters. But it's consistent. It's not behaving right." I laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. "You need to stop licking sea slugs, man. You're starting to sound like one. The sea is the sea. It comes in, it goes out. End of story." He pulled away, a strange intensity in his face. "It's not the end of the story. It's the beginning." I dismissed it. Tiago had always been prone to academic fixation. Last year it was the declining population of a specific type of crab no one else had ever heard of. This was just a new chapter in his book of oceanic anxieties. But later, long after Tiago had gone home with his charts and his string, I stayed on the beach. The last of the kiosks had closed. I was alone with the city at my back and the ocean before me. I closed my eyes, expecting the familiar shush crash of the waves, the rhythmic sigh of the Atlantic. Instead, I heard something else. It was low, deep, and unnervingly regular. A soft, resonant thump, thump, thump. It wasn't the sound of water hitting sand. It was a pulse. A slow, massive heartbeat emanating from the deep. I opened my eyes, scanning the horizon for a container ship, an oil tanker, anything that could explain the sound. There was nothing. Just the endless, dark water and that steady, subaudible beat that I felt more in my sternum than I heard with my ears. I shook my head, the sand gritty beneath my worn tread boots. It was fatigue. The drone of my engine all day. The cachaca. It had to be. I got on my bike and drove home, forcing the engine to a scream, trying to drown out the quiet, pulsing thing that had replaced the sound of the sea. The next morning, the silence had seeped a little further into my world. The usual 7 a.m. argument from the apartment below was absent. The radio in the corner bakery played nothing but static. And when I looked out my window, I saw my neighbor, Dona Elvira, standing on her balcony. She wasn't watering her wilting geraniums or shaking out a rug. She was just standing there, her hands resting on the railing, her gaze fixed on the sliver of green-blue water visible between the buildings. Motionless. Waiting. My delivery bag felt heavier that day. Each order was a journey into another pocket of this spreading quiet. A family sitting around a dinner table, food untouched, all of them staring at a fish tank where the colorful acarabandera swam in lazy circles. A group of office workers on their lunch break in a park, sitting on benches in a perfect row, their heads all turned at the same slight angle towards the harbor. They weren't comatose. They would blink if I spoke to them, take the food, hand me the money with limp fingers. But it was like interacting with beautifully crafted automatons whose primary programming had been temporarily suspended. The city's vibrant, chaotic symphony was being deconstructed, instrument by instrument. The brassy honk of taxis, the reedy whine of vendors, the soaring strings of laughter, all fading into a muted, ambient hum. All that remained was the bass line, that deep, oceanic pulse that was growing stronger day by day, a rhythm that only I, and perhaps Tiago, seemed to hear. The rest of Salvador was starting to sway to it. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. The rationalizations crumbled like sandcastles against a rising tide. For a week, I'd clung to them. A new municipal noise ordinance. A strange, collective mood. A citywide hangover. But the quiet wasn't a policy, and it wasn't a mood. It was a presence. It was a creeping paralysis of spirit. The change in the ocean's sound was no longer deniable. The pulsing heartbeat was a constant companion now, a low-frequency hum that vibrated up through the soles of my feet when I walked on the pavement. Sometimes, late at night, I could feel it through my mattress. It was the sound of a sleeping giant, and the city was holding its breath, trying not to wake it. My delivery routes became expeditions into a foreign land I'd once called home. The stairs were the worst part. Before, I was invisible, a fleeting yellow and red blur on a motorcycle. Now, heads turned as I passed. The standing people. The ones on balconies and street corners, would follow my progress with placid, empty eyes. They weren't hostile. They weren't anything. They were just, watching. Their collective gaze felt like a physical weight, a silent judgment on my noise, my frantic motion in their stilling world. I started taking longer, more convoluted routes to avoid the main promenades along the shore. I tried to talk about it. It was a desperate, primal need to find one other person who saw the creeping wrongness. Dona Elvira, I said one afternoon, catching her in the hallway. Have you noticed, it's very quiet lately? She smiled, a sweet, vacant expression that didn't reach her eyes. Her gaze was fixed on the window at the end of the hall. Yes. So peaceful. Good for the soul. She didn't hear the capital Q quiet. She just heard the absence of her neighbor's arguments. I tried the other riders at the central dispatch point, a greasy cafe that had once been a bedlam of shouted orders and crude jokes. Now, half a dozen of them sat at the tables, sipping coffee, their movements languid. No one's playing music anymore, I said, my voice sounding harsh and loud in the subdued space. The streets, people are just standing around. Don't you see it? A writer named Marco, a guy who used to boast about his custom sound system, just shrugged. My head doesn't hurt at the end of the day. It's good. He took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes tracking a fly buzzing near the ceiling. He was one of them. Not fully gone, but sinking. My isolation became a physical ache. I was a single, frantic nerve ending in a body that was slowly going numb. My only hope was Tiago. But Tiago was drifting further out to sea than any of them. His apartment had transformed from a student's messy den into the sanctum of a monomaniac. The walls were covered in nautical charts, some modern, some photocopies of ancient, hand-drawn maps. Red lines crisscrossed the bay, converging on a point a few kilometers offshore. Tide tables were taped over his windows, blocking out the light. He had 3 different tide gauges of his own construction, plastic bottles, rulers, and tubes, set up on his balcony, and he logged their readings in a notebook every hour. They're coming back, Rafa, he whispered, his eyes wide and bloodshot, his face pale under a sheen of sweat. He hadn't been sleeping. Who, Tiago? Who is coming back? I grabbed his shoulders. He felt bird-like, fragile. You have to tell me what's happening. Not who, he hissed, pulling away. What? It's a recurrence. A cycle. The old maps hint at it. The Mare Silenciosa. The silent tide. He pointed a trembling finger at one of his charts. The water level isn't rising because of melting ice caps. The displacement is wrong. It's rising because something is surfacing. His fear was different from mine. I was afraid of the quiet, of the loss of my world. Tiago was afraid of what was causing it. He saw it as an ecological event, a monstrous, biological reality. One evening, my paranoia got the better of me. I told Tiago I was going home, but I parked my bike in an alley and waited. After an hour, he emerged from his building, carrying a canvas satchel. He moved with a furtive energy, completely unlike the placid stillness of the others. He was still fighting. I followed him on foot, sticking to the shadows. He led me away from the popular beaches, towards a neglected stretch of coastline north of the city, a place of black, volcanic rock and treacherous currents. It was a place locals avoided, steeped in grim stories of drownings and lost ships. He scrambled down a crumbling path to a secluded cove I'd never seen before. The air here was cold, and the pulsing from the ocean was so strong it felt like standing next to a colossal subwoofer. I watched from behind a cluster of jagged rocks. Tiago wasn't performing a ritual, not exactly. He was taking measurements. He laid a long, marked pole against a specific rock formation, a spire of basalt that jutted from the water like a crooked finger. He muttered to himself, scribbling frantically in his notebook. He seemed to be measuring the water's height against ancient, barely visible carvings on the rock, spirals and wave-like patterns. As he was packing up, something slipped from his bag and fell to the wet sand with a soft thud. It was a stone. He didn't notice. He just scrambled back up the path and disappeared. I waited until the sound of his footsteps faded, then made my way down to the cove. The stone was easy to find. It was unlike any rock on the beach. It was perfectly smooth, the color of a deep bruise, and shaped like a flattened heart. When I picked it up, a shock of cold shot up my arm, a deep, cellular cold that had nothing to do with the night air. And the moment my skin touched it, the pulsing sound from the ocean was completely gone. Muted. I held it to my ear. It was absorbing the sound, creating a perfect vacuum of silence around it. I dropped it as if it had burned me. The deep thump, thump, thump of the ocean's heart rushed back in, louder than before. I snatched the stone up again, my heart hammering against my ribs, and wrapped it in my handkerchief. This was it. A piece of the puzzle. A red herring. Or something much, much worse. I started spending my nights in the municipal library's dusty archives, the strange, cold stone in my pocket like a talisman against the encroaching quiet. I told my dispatcher I had a family emergency, that I needed time off. The deliveries had become unbearable. My motorcycle, once my wings of freedom, now felt like a cage, forcing me through the streets of the silent and the staring. I searched for any mention of the Mare Silenciosa from Tiago's frantic notes. Most of my searching led to dead ends, geological surveys, shipping manifests. But then, tucked into the back of a tattered volume of colonial-era folklore compiled by a long-dead Portuguese priest, I found it. A single, chilling passage. It wasn't a story, but a warning. The priest wrote of a local Tupi legend that the Christian God had thankfully erased. A legend of the Povo do Fundo, the people of the deep. They weren't gods or monsters, but a form of consciousness that slept in the abyssal plains. The legend said that every few centuries, they would awaken, and their awakening would send a silent tide washing over the land. Not a tide of water, but of perception. It stilled the noise, quieted the mind, and drew the people of the coast back to the water's edge, not in death, but in communion. To rejoin the great, silent, dreaming mind of the ocean. Els Neo Conquistum, the priest had written, his spidery script shaking with what I could only imagine was terror. Els apenas camum para casa. They do not conquer. They simply call you home. I left the library, the words echoing in my head. The cold stone felt like a block of ice in my pocket. Outside, the streetlights flickered in a slow, steady rhythm. The same rhythm as the pulse from the bay. The same rhythm as a sleeping heart. The city wasn't just getting quiet. It was being tuned. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The world began to warp at the edges. It was no longer just the absence of sound and the staring people, reality itself was becoming soft, pliable. One afternoon, riding through a neighborhood far from the shore, I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw the reflection of the street behind me shimmering, the asphalt seeming to flow like dark water for a second before snapping back to solid blacktop. Another time, looking up at the iconic Christ the Redeemer statue that watched over the city from its peak on Corcovado Mountain, I could have sworn its head was turned. Not facing forward over the city, but angled slightly, its stoic stone gaze aimed directly at the sea. I blinked, and it was back to normal. My mind, I told myself, was fraying from the stress. But the doubt was a poison. The pulse was the bedrock of this new reality. It was undeniable now, a constant, visceral presence. I could feel it in the vibrations of a glass of water on my table, in the rattling of my window frame. The few people still moving about the city seemed to unconsciously sink to it. A street sweeper's broom would move in a slow, metronomic sweep. A woman's rocking chair on a porch would creak in perfect time. Thump, sweep, thump, creak, thump. They were becoming part of the orchestra. My only anchor was Tiago, but he was slipping his moorings. I went to his apartment, pounding on the door until he finally opened it. He looked like a castaway. His clothes were damp, his hair was matted with salt, and his eyes were hollowed-out pits of terror. The smell of the ocean, brine and decay, clung to him. "You were right," I said, my voice low. I showed him the passage from the priest's book. The Povo do Fundo. The silent tide. It's a consciousness. It's calling people. He just shook his head, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. "It's not a story, Rafa. It's biology. A biological event on a scale we can't comprehend." He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "You have the stone, don't you? I saw you on the beach." I nodded, pulling the wrapped stone from my pocket. "Don't you understand what that is?" he whispered, his eyes darting around the room as if the walls were listening. "It's part of them. Or something like them. A node. A silencer. It's old, Rafa. Older than the rocks it was sitting on. It doesn't belong to our world. It fell, or was left behind from the last time." He let go of me and stumbled back to his charts. "The pulse, it's a signal. A bioresonant frequency. It's not just calling. It's rewriting. It's overriding our frantic, chaotic brainwaves with its own slow, deep, simple one. The quiet isn't an absence of sound. It's the presence of their sound. One single note to replace the symphony." He collapsed into a chair, his body trembling. "They don't want to hurt us," he said, his voice cracking. It was the most terrifying thing he could have said. "They want us to join. To be quiet with them. To stop all this, frantic, lonely screaming." He gestured weakly at the city, at the whole of human existence. "And the worst part, Rafa, the worst part is that it sounds like peace." That was the last coherent conversation I had with him. The stakes escalated a week later. The power grid began to fail, but not in a normal way. Entire districts would go dark, only for their lights to begin pulsing in unison with the oceanic rhythm, a vast, city-sized beacon of soft, rhythmic light. The water from the tap started to run brackish, tasting of salt, even miles from the shore. The very infrastructure of the city was being co-opted, integrated into the new system. I tried to find an ally, anyone. I sought out a history professor at the university whose name was listed as a consultant on the folklore book. I found him in his office, a dusty room filled with books. He was staring out his window, towards the bay. Professor Alvarez. I began, my voice trembling slightly. I need to ask you about the Povo do Fundo. He turned to me slowly. His face was calm, serene. He was one of them. A fascinating myth, he said, his voice a soft, melodic hum. The longing for the great quiet. The return to the source. It speaks to a deep need in the human soul, don't you think? A need for peace. He smiled, and I saw that he wasn't just accepting the change, he was welcoming it. He was a willing convert. My search for an ally had led me straight into the heart of the choir. I fled. My apartment was no longer a sanctuary. The pulse seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. I spent my days riding aimlessly through the thinning traffic, my engine a defiant roar against the growing silence, the sound-dampening stone a cold weight in my pocket. I was the last noisy man in Salvador. Then, Tiago disappeared. I went to his apartment and found the door unlocked, swinging gently in the breeze from the open balcony window. The place was empty. The charts were still on the wall, but his notebooks, his clothes, his self-made tide gauges, all gone. The only thing out of place was a single, wet footprint on the floor near the balcony door. It was barefoot, and it led out. Not in. Out. On his desk, next to a chart of the bay with its angry red converging lines, was his final, frantic note, scrawled on a torn piece of paper. The water is the blood. The pulse is the heart. The quiet is the voice. It's time to go home. I'm sorry, Rafa. My hope, my last connection to the world that was, had been extinguished. He hadn't been taken. He had answered the call. He had gone to the beach and walked into the sea to join the great, silent, dreaming thing that was waking up beneath the waves. And now, I was truly, utterly alone, waiting for the tide to finally come all the way in. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The end arrived not with a bang, or a whimper, but with the falling of a final curtain of silence. It happened at sunset. I was on my bike, parked on a hill in the Dois de Julho district, looking out over the bay. One moment, the air held the residual hum of the city, a distant generator, the rustle of wind through palm trees, the cry of a lone gull. The next, it was all gone. It wasn't just quiet. It was a perfect, pressurized null. The air felt thick, solid. My own breathing sounded like a storm in my ears. The low, oceanic pulse, which had been the base note of my world for weeks, suddenly became the only thing. It was no longer a sound I heard, but a pressure I felt in my bones, a rhythmic squeezing of my entire being. Thump. 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 I looked down at the city. My confrontation wasn't with a monster or an army. It was with an invitation. The streets below, which had been sparsely populated with the standing people, were now filling up. From every apartment block, every house, every shaded doorway, they emerged. Dona Elvira from my building, her face serene. Jorge the bartender, his big shoulders relaxed. The university professor. The other delivery riders. Everyone. They weren't a mob. There was no panic, no screaming. They moved with a slow, hypnotic grace, a collective river of humanity flowing through the canyon-like streets. And they were all heading in one direction, towards the sea. From my vantage point, I could see the long curve of the Porto de Barra beach. Thousands of people were assembling on the sand. They formed neat, silent lines, facing the water as the last light of the sun bled from the sky. A pull, potent and undeniable, tugged at the center of my chest. It was a feeling I hadn't realized I was fighting all along, a deep, cellular yearning. The pulse from the ocean was a lullaby, a promise. Join us. Be still. No more anxiety. No more struggle. No more lonely noise. Come home. Be at peace. I thought of Tiago's last words, it sounds like peace. And it did. It felt like an end to a lifetime of striving, of fighting traffic and bills and loneliness. My hand loosened on the motorcycle's grip. It would be so easy to just turn the engine off, to walk down the hill and take my place in line. To be silent with them. What stopped me? A memory. A flash of pure, chaotic noise, the sound of a samba school at carnival, 1,000 drums beating in a dozen frantic, complicated, glorious rhythms all at once. The smell of sweat and beer and perfume. The crush of laughing, dancing bodies. The sheer, messy, overwhelming vitality of it all. That was life. Not this sterile, silent peace. This was an ending. That was living. The choice was made. My confrontation was with the temptation of oblivion. I thumbed the ignition. The roar of my Honda's engine was a blasphemy, a violent scream tearing through the sacred silence. It was the loudest sound in the world. Down below, the heads of the silent procession turned as one. They looked up the hill towards me. There was no anger in their faces, no malice. Just a faint, collective curiosity. The look an ancient, dreaming creature might give a buzzing fly that had briefly disturbed its slumber. I wrenched the handlebars, turned the bike away from the sea, and gunned the engine. I tore through the empty backstreets, my headlight cutting a lonely path through the pulsing darkness. The crowds on the main avenues parted for me without breaking stride, a river diverting around a stone, their placid eyes following me until I was gone.